weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum braucht er was zum Essen, bitte sehr. Es macht ihn ein Geschwätz nicht satt, das schafft kein Essen her.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Mensch ein Mensch ist, drum hat der Stiefel im Gesicht nicht gern. Er will unter sich keinen Sklaven sehen und über sich keinen Herrn.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Und weil der Prolet ein Prolet ist, drum wird ihn kein anderer befreien. Es kann die Befreiung der Arbeiter nur das Werk der Arbeiter sein.
Drum links, zwei, drei, drum links, zwei, drei, wo dein Platz genossen ist, weil ich heim in die Arbeit einheimst und weil du auch ein Arbeiter bist.
Здравствуйте, comrades. Welcome to Socialism Saturday. Socialism Saturday is a show where we watch real socialists, the farthest left of the far left, the most dystopian of the dystopian, and we watch them in their full form, their trainings, their presentations, because we want to know what the real socialists are talking about. We're not talking about Bernie Sanders. We're not talking about AOC. We're not talking about CNN. We're not talking about champagne socialists like Vosh. These are the real socialist activists that you never see talked about and never see covered. But they are constantly working, constantly teaching, constantly showing up in the world. And that is why we figured out a while ago, about 10 months ago to be exact, that if we go back a couple of years, like 2, 3, 4, 5 years, and we watch socialist presentations from like a couple years ago, essentially, those are the talking points of the Democratic Party today. So Socialism Saturday is a little sneak preview into what we have in store for us. And, sometimes it's hard to watch, sometimes it's hard to understand, but I think the people who watch Socialism Saturday are going to be much better prepared for what's coming than pretty much anyone else on the internet. And that is why we are so far ahead of where other people on the internet are in terms of understanding what is going on in the world. So I want to start off by saying this. I want to thank everyone for allowing me the flexibility to take yesterday off from happy hour. I had fully planned to do happy hour. I had like 3 different presentations I was going to pick from, and we'd have a good choice for happy hour next week. It was kind of funny though, because like a couple friends of mine, like Liberty people, were wanting to get together to like last night, and I was like, at first I was like, no, I have a stream, and then they were like, come on, Carlin, we don't get together all that often, and I was like, all right, and so I canceled the stream, and I got Victor to agree to go, and then right as I was finishing this interview I had yesterday with Larry Sharp, like literally right at 5 p.m., my friend messages the group and she's like, we can't do it tonight, guys. My dog is sick. So Victor and I ended up going out for dinner and a movie instead. But I do want to thank you guys for the flexibility to have last night off to go have some downtime. We didn't do happy hour, but we are back today for Socialism Saturday. Carlin, Yasmin has a question. Did you schedule an interview with that guy, the QAnon shaman? I reached out to him. He hasn't answered yet, but hopefully we'll have our fingers crossed that the QAnon shaman will join us at some point. But guys, we do have a great presentation that we are watching today. Let me get it up. We are watching from our favorite socialist book co-op in North Carolina, Firestorm Co-op. And you got to give Firestorm Co-op credit. They have a lot of great socialist panels and discussion groups and things like that on their YouTube channel. And the reason I actually like Firestorm Co-op is not just because they produce a lot of content, but I actually find, and let me know if you guys agree, I find their content to be much more understandable, because one of the challenges we have, especially if you are new to Socialism Saturday, if you are new, welcome, we're glad you're here, but it sometimes is challenging for new people to attend Socialism Saturday because socialists quite literally speak in a different language. They speak in code. It might sound like English, but it's not English. It's socialist. And the only way that you can really learn to speak socialist is by watching socialism content. It's kind of like if you want to learn how to speak French, go to France. Just live in France, immerse yourself in France. Eventually, you will learn French by osmosis of living in France. It's the same thing with socialism, right? We have to watch enough socialism to be able to know, learn by osmosis what these people mean. But I will say that Firestorm Co-op generally has some of the most listener friendly socialist content that we've watched, and I do hope this one is going to be the same. I decided I wanted to watch this abolitionist queer strategies one because I think that queer Marxism is actually one of the most relevant types of socialism that we can watch, because when we're talking about queer Marxism, and basically anytime you see the word queer, guys, that's going to be queer is a far left political ideology. Okay? It's not an identity. It has nothing to do with being gay. It has nothing to do with being trans. You do not have to be gay or trans in order to be queer. The only thing you need to do to be queer is to declare yourself queer. Queer is not about who you sleep with. Queer is not about whether or not you get your breast removed. It's not about any of these things. It is only about destabilizing the system. That is the stated goal of queer theory, to push back on all the norms in society to create a destabilizing force. And so anytime you see the word queer, that's something that we want to pay attention to when it comes to socialism, because this is all coming from the queer Marxism, queer theory school of thought. And this is where you have radical gender ideology. This is why you have everyone showing up as non-binary. This is where you have kids transitioning in schools. This is where you have rates of up to 40 to 50% of kids in school identifying as gender fluid, gender nonconforming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It all comes from this. Yes, and this is correct too. It originated by Foucault, a pedo. Indeed. And just to be clear, guys, I don't get into the literature like James Lindsay does. He is the king of that. He is the master for that. No one can ever top him, so I don't even bother to do it. But he is right that it did originate from Foucault, and you can probably find a ton of information about that over at New Discourses with James Lindsay. What we do in Socialism Saturday and generally on my channel is we watch videos of how it shows up in the real world based on what they're actually teaching to people and how that literature manifests into practice. But yeah, this all comes from very dark places. So let's read the description for tonight's presentation. Let's see. Editor Scott Branson is joined by contributors to Surviving the Future, a new collection of the most current ideas in radical queer movement work and revolutionary queer theory. Panelists include a PhD candidate and instructor at the University of Minnesota. We always have college professors on Socialism Saturday. Does anyone find it coincidental that we always have college professors presenting Marxist presentations on Socialism Saturday? I don't find that coincidental myself, but we do have an instructor here from the University of Minnesota. That's going to be or I don't know how to pronounce that name. I'm sure we'll find out. Let's see. We have Matilda, who is the author of The Freezer Door. Matilda is a New York Times editor's choice and a finalist for some book awards. Oh, great. So the New York Times is supporting queer Marxism. I know we're all shocked by that revelation. Scott Branson is a queer, trans, anarchist writer, translator, community organizer, and teacher. They were an organizer for the UNC Asheville Davidson College. No shit. I know a guy that went to Davidson. That surprises me. But oh well, more higher ed connections. There we go. Let's see. And then we have Yasmin. There's someone named Yasmin in the presentation. She's the editor at large of Current Affairs on the editorial board of Anarchist Review of Books, co-founder of the radical queer editorial collective Against Equality. Look at that. The name of their collective is actually Against Equality. Pop quiz in the chat. Why would a socialist collective be named Against Equality? I'll wait for a second for you guys to chat and your answers on that. She's currently working on her book, Strange Love, A History of Social Justice and Why It Needs to Die. Oh, isn't that interesting? It'll be interesting to hear from her. Guys, that is what we have today for our presentation. It is about an hour and a half long, so I hope you've got some drinks. And yes, so why are we against equality? Because we're in favor of equity. We're in favor of equity. That's right. Equity and equality are not the same thing. Equality is about equality of opportunity. Equity is about equality of outcomes. It is about normalizing where everyone ends and creating a society full of the mediocre in which no one is ever allowed to be exceptional, just like in Harrison Bergeron. And that is exactly what the socialists want. So that's what we've got on board today, guys. Please mount that like button for me if you have not already. We just got a couple orders of business before we get started. Number one, if you are not yet subscribed to my Substack, now is a great day to get subscribed to my Substack. This is my number one place for content on the internet. I have another post going up tonight, also perhaps a podcast going up tonight if I really get my stuff together. And so this is where I break down the woke ideology into plain English. I teach you the psychology behind what they're doing. I break everything down to the most bare bones, like plain language explanations that I possibly can, because I want to teach you how the woke left is showing up in the world and what they're trying to do, etc., etc., etc. There's lots of great content on the Substack. If you haven't been back in a while, I definitely encourage you to give it a visit. Specifically, I would encourage you guys to check out the Woke Mind series, because this is where I'm really breaking down the psychology of the woke left. We also have Woke 101. So for those of you who are new to this stuff and just want like simple explanations, like why are there suddenly so many non-binary people in the world, I will explain that to you as basically as I possibly can over on the Substack, Carlin, KARLYN.substack.com. You do get a bunch of perks if you sign up as a paid supporter. You can always subscribe for free, but if you sign up as a paid supporter, you get a number of perks to include my premium content on the Substack. You also get access to my private Zoom calls that I do every single Monday and Wednesday with my supporter community, and you get access to my supporter Discord. Tayden, good to see you. Can you explain what Substack is? I've never used it. Substack is just a content platform. That's all it is. It's a place where I can publish print articles. It's a place where I can publish podcasts. It's a place where they have their own Twitter-like feature called Notes that's like so much better than Twitter. It's not even funny. But it is just a place where you can either sign up to get email updates from me for free, or you can support my work at $8 a month and $80 a year. You're right, Autumn. It did used to be $5, but I raised my prices at the beginning of the month like I told you I was going to, and to get myself more in line with other creators. And so if you do want to support the work I'm doing, this is the very best place to do it. You can support it on a monthly level, on an annual level, etc., etc., etc. And you get all sorts of perks when you do that, to include access to my supporter Discord. And that's important because tomorrow we do a weekly movie night in my supporter Discord. Normally, movie nights on Sundays start at 8 p.m. However, tomorrow we are watching Titanic. Titanic is 3.5 hours long. So we decided to start movie night an hour early. So for everyone who is coming to movie night, make sure you remember it is starting at 7 p.m. tomorrow, 7 p.m. If you show up at 8 p.m., we're going to be like an hour into Titanic, man. The boat's already going to start to sink. You don't want to miss the first half of Titanic, the good part, the part where they fall in love and all that stuff before the iceberg hits and then the whole thing goes to hell. So you want to make sure you show up at 7 p.m. Eastern time. We do trivia about the movie. We chat about it. We listen to music related to it, stuff like that. It really is a great night, guys. There are a whole bunch of people from my community who come, and I hope you'll be able to join us for Titanic. And if Titanic isn't your game, I know there are a lot of guys in the chat and even some girls as well who are not happy that we're watching Titanic. But listen, there were way too many people in my community who haven't seen Titanic, all right? Whether you like Titanic or not, it is an incredible movie. They did a great job. And you know what? Everyone needs to see Titanic at some point, all right? And so I'm doing a service to my community members, who haven't seen Titanic because they should. So we're getting started at 7 p.m. tomorrow, and I do hope you guys can join us for that. Let me see. I saw Grandma Nay says, I'm getting my dad the Trump victory shirt for his birthday. I showed it to him, and he loved it. Well, let's look at that Trump victory shirt, Grandma Nay, because I do have that over in my Unwoke art store. You can find the link in the description below. This is a special limited edition set of merch that I'm doing to celebrate the latest round of Trump indictments. And these were inspired actually by like concert t-shirts that you get at a rock concert. And so what it is I've got this great Trump victory design on the front, the Trump Indictment Victory Tour 2024. And then on the back, just like you would get the concert tour dates on a concert t-shirt, you have the full current list of Trump indictments. There may be more coming. That he might get indicted in Georgia as well, and maybe even I heard Wisconsin too. So that list might be growing. So right now, you can get the original, the one, the only, the exclusive, the limited edition merchandise, the Trump Indictment Victory Tour t-shirt. I've also got it in tank tops, hoodies, and I did do a women's cut. Women have been annoying me for a women's cut t-shirt. So I made you a women's cut t-shirt, all right. I don't want to hear any more complaining from the women. Although I will say this, I actually really personally like the way this particular fabric in this t-shirt lands in the unisex one. It's super soft. It's a nice jersey fabric. It actually, I think it actually looks decent on women. It's not boxy like a lot of unisex t-shirts are. So whichever one you want, but I did give the women who have been begging me for women's cut t-shirts what they wanted. And so we'll see who shows up for it. But guys, that is available in the Unwoke Art store right now. And you can find that on unwokeart.com. Just a couple more things before we get started. I just want to remind everyone in my locals community. Now, we had a little bit of a kerfuffle this past week in my locals, and this is only for my supporters on locals, all right? We had a kerfuffle this past week where a member of Carrie Smith's horde, and if you don't know who that is, don't worry about it. I'll explain more in a second. Basically, a member of Carrie Smith's horde. Carrie Smith has been running a smear campaign on me on the internet for like 2 effing years. Paid money to be a part of my locals community to get access to my community Zoom link, which they then entered and joined to spy on us and played porn on the Zoom call. Now, this has never happened in the 3 years that I've been doing these Zoom calls, but now it has because Carrie's horde just can't quit me. And in response to that, I'm putting some extra security measures in place in regards to specifically my paid supporters on locals getting access to the Zoom calls. If you are a paid supporter on locals, not on Substack, not on Patreon, please make sure you respond to this post and tell me if you want to be included in the Zoom calls, because I need to put some security measures in place to make sure that doesn't happen again. And I do apologize for the people who saw that, because obviously it wasn't my understanding that Carrie Smith supporters were going to pay me money in order to play porn in my community. I really didn't think the good Christian Carrie had sunk so low, but she has, per her usual game. And so we just need to deal with it, and that's all we can really do. And so if you want more information about who Carrie Smith is and who her horde is, I actually do have a Substack explaining this. It is survivingcarriesmith.substack.com. The reason I bring this up is because yesterday I was on Larry Sharp's show, The Sharp Way, and Larry invited me on a while ago, and we just hadn't gotten around to it. And so we scheduled it. We were going to have a nice chat. And then Carrie Smith's woke cancel horde decided to basically lose their shit on Larry Sharpe for daring to invite me on his show. Now, this is a Substack where I document all of the bullshit that I get inundated with because of this bitch. And so if you want to know more about what happened, then check out the Substack. Again, this is the latest article. I just put it up. And let me show you this, because this documents all of their bullshit, but I want to show you one in particular that really just like is the epitome of who these people are. Whenever they see me go on a show, they basically lose their shit and like attack the people who are platforming me because they don't want me to ever have a platform ever. So look at this. Check this out. So Larry Sharpe puts this thumbnail on Twitter yesterday. And this is the thumbnail for the show. And it literally just has my Twitter profile picture in it. That's it. And let me show you the reaction of Carrie Smith's like insane cancel horde. Just one of their messages in particular, I was like, this just sums all this up so beautifully. Where was it? I just saw it. Hang on. Where was it? Oh, this one right here. Ugh, that photo of her filtered all to hell. I cannot stomach that seductive look. This degenerate woman cannot be allowed to continue to harm people. Thank you for warning this man. They literally called me a harlot because of my Twitter profile photo. They literally called me a harlot because apparently I'm too pretty in my Twitter profile photo. Anyway, that's the type of bullshit that I have to put up with to be live on the internet with you guys. And I do it, but I document the nonsense along the way. And if you want to know more about the backstory on that, definitely check out survivingcarriesmith.substack.com. And you're going to want to start with chapter 1 if you're new to the site, because this has been building a long time, and I want you to have the full context. Beth, I deleted my porn collection after that, Carlin. It gave me a crisis of conscience. I'm sorry, Beth. I didn't want to see that shit either. Anyway. Oh, yeah. Oh, they have nothing. They were reeing in Larry Sharpe's chat for 2 straight hours yesterday. People in the chat can attest to that, because I had my supporters in the chat too. They were complaining and whining and screeching in his live chat for 2 straight hours. These people are insane. Anyway, that's what's going on there. All right, guys, that is all I have. Let's get this show started. As a reminder, please mount that like button for me. Mounting the like button lets YouTube know to recommend my content to other people so we can have more friends and come to join us. And there is a shocking disparity between the number of people who are watching right now and the number of people who've mounted that like button. So I'm just going to wait patiently for a moment. Just going to wait patiently for those like button numbers to go up. Come on. And while we are waiting patiently for that, I just want to say hello to everyone watching on Odyssey, Rockfin, and Rumble. I do appreciate you guys. I hope you're having a good day. Please always make sure you are subscribed on alternative platforms, guys, just in case something happens with the old YouTubes. We want to make sure we have backups and things like that. All right, let me see. Come on, let's get those likes up. We can do better than that. Come on. Let's see. Got a question from Mark. Is Carrie born again? Kind of. Carrie wasn't a Christian. Carrie became a Christian like 2 years ago, and suddenly everyone else was a God-hating heathen. And of course, I'm a heathen because I'm not a Christian and never will be. But yeah, I mean, basically, I wouldn't call her born again, but like kind of born again, Mark. Kind of born again. Oh, bingo! Thank you, Trendolin. Bingo is a good idea. Now, should we do socialism bingo or should we do gender queer bingo? Let's do socialism bingo. Socialism bingo will be more reliable. Why doesn't Carrie like me? Because Carrie's a psycho. No, you need to go read Surviving Carrie Smith. I'm not going to rehash it. Like, basically, like, I've spoken to Carrie less than 5 times in my adult life, and Carrie spent 2 years of her life, 2 solid years, smearing me on the internet, to include writing an essay about me being her abusive mother. That's still live on the internet today. So if you want to see what Carrie has said about me, like literally Surviving Carrie Smith is mostly screenshots of what Carrie has said about me. And then you can report back to me and let me know why Carrie doesn't like me. I personally think Carrie has either borderline personality disorder or dissociative disorder, and she has convinced herself that I'm her abusive mother. But we're not going to talk about that anymore because socialists are actually much more functional than Carrie Smith is. All right, guys, let's get this party started. I guess we have a sufficient amount of likes for right now. We are watching Abolitionist Queer Strategies. Oh, I need to hit play, apparently. There we go. That might help on a good day.
All right. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Liberty, and I'm a member of the Firestorm Collective. We're excited to host this discussion about revolutionary queer theory and a new book from PM Press, Surviving the Future, Abolitionist Queer Strategies. So Firestorm is a 15-year-old radical bookstore owned and operated by
Victor
a queer
got me a
feminist
banana
collective
beer
in
to
Southern
have.
Appalachia on the land of the Cherokee people.
Land
We strive to feature
blessing!
book events that reflect our interests and the needs of marginalized communities in the South. We're also committed to continuing to offer events like this one online because we love reaching people at a distance. And I think tonight's a great example of that with our panelists, but also because we know that COVID provides a barrier to a lot of people.
He's saying COVID provides a barrier to a lot of people. This was literally recorded a month ago. These people still think that there is a COVID pandemic and that it's still inhibiting a lot of people.
In our community who are not able to access spaces like this in person. In the next month, we're going to be hosting conversations on the ritual power of poetry and collective strategies for weathering state repression. So if that's something you're interested in,
if you guys are drinking anything fun, let us know what you're drinking in the chat. This is from Pipe Dream Brewing, which is a good New Hampshire brewery.
Our newsletter or the events calendar on our website. So for tonight, we are using Zoom's Q&A tool. If you're on a laptop or a phone, it's probably somewhere at the bottom. You can dig around and find it.
So this is going to be a good night for you, Bob.
We definitely want to hear from you. It's always really gratifying when the audience becomes participant. So please definitely give us your questions as we go, and we will be kind of reserving space at the end to really dig into those Q&A topics. If you're on Facebook and you're catching this as a stream, you can use the comment section to post your questions. All right, so we're going to get started here. Tonight, we're joined by editor Scott Branson and 3 contributors to Surviving the Future, and I'll just briefly introduce them. Scott is a queer, trans, anarchist writer, translator, community organizer, and teacher. They were an organizer for the UNC Asheville Davidson College Queer Studies Conference that inspired this book. They translated The Abolition of Prison and Gay Liberation After May 68, for which they wrote a critical introduction. Scott's the author of Practical Anarchism, a daily guide, which I swear we literally just did an event for like a couple weeks ago. So go watch that on our YouTube channel. It was a great conversation. And Scott is currently working on a book on trans anarcho-feminism. They often contribute to The Final Straw Radio, a weekly anarchist radio show and podcast. E. Ornelas is a PhD candidate, instructor at the University of Minnesota, and descendant of a survivor of the Sherman Institute, a native boarding school in Riversdale, California. E studies community-based, abolitionist-informed responses to gendered, racialized, and colonial violence in Black and Indigenous speculative fiction. This research has been published in the International Journal of Critical Indigenous Studies and Science Fiction Research Association Review.
Hang on. I got a super chat from Tayton. Tayton, thank you. There is a beer I drank called Hi-Fi Hef. Oh, I like Hefeweizens. This is a Hefeweizen with banana, and it's very good honey ginger beer made by Iron Horse Brewery. Where's Iron Horse Brewery out of, Tayton? Thank you for the beer recommendation. If anyone else has beer recommendations, let us know in the chat. We do like craft beer on this channel.
Founded an autonomous Black and Pink chapter in Minneapolis and the mutual aid Twin Cities Housing Cooperative. Matilda Bernstein Sycamore is the author of The Freezer Door,
That
a New
brewery's
York
out of
Times
Washington.
Editor's Choice and a finalist for the Penn Jean Stein Book Award. Her latest anthology is Between Certain...
Hang on, we got another super chat. Rottweiler, off topic but related. Here in Mexico, the public education secretary approved pro-communist textbooks for primary public schools. They are skipping the queer step, going full communism. Rottweiler, can you send me some information about that if you happen to have any? You can send it to my email, which is activelyunwoke@gmail.com. If you have anything readily available. If you don't, that's fine. I can look it up myself. But that's really interesting. I feel like I heard something about that somewhere. I didn't really look into it, though, but I do appreciate you sharing that with us. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Go right to communism.
Certain Death and a Possible Future, queer writing on growing up with the AIDS crisis. And her next book, Touching the Art, will be published in November by Soft Skull Press. Yasmin Nair is a writer, academic, and activist. She's an editor-at-large at Current Affairs, on the editorial board of the Anarchist Review of Books, co-founder of the radical queer editorial collective Against Equality, and the volunteer policy director of Gender Just. She currently is working on her new book, Strange Love, A History of Social Justice and Why.
Hang on, Bot says, I want to see Carlin drink a Bud Light while watching Dylan Mulvaney on a late night stream. Bot, that would be effing hilarious. Honestly, and if it weren't for the fact that Bud Light is like the lowest quality of all beer, I don't even care that they had Dylan Mulvaney as a spokesperson. That's not why I would never drink Bud Light. It legitimately sucks as a beer. And so, while I would appreciate this as a joke, and I think it would just be hilarious how teed off conservatives would get about it, I can't do it because Bud Light is not a worthy beer to be on this channel, Bot. There are some lines that you will not cross. There are some things that are just sacred, and I will not besmirch my channel with the inclusion of Bud Light.
It needs to die. Her writing can be found at yasminnair.com. So welcome, everyone. This is like a really special and fun event to get to do. If anybody has read the book yet, you'll know that the backstory, which I believe Scott is going to get more of, does sort of start in our community here in Western North Carolina, which is very unusual for any book that isn't, I don't know, regional fiction or something, but particularly unusual for a radical queer collection of essays. So that is fantastic. And also an opportunity for me to get to kind of host an event with some authors who I really admire. So without further ado, I will pass it off to Scott. Thank you so much, everybody, for being here.
Thanks, Liberty, for the introductions for all of us and for hosting, for Firestorm hosting this event. I'm super excited to be here and talk with everyone.
I think this is a
as Liberty said, just like, feel free to put questions as they come to you in the Q&A. And the way we're going to do is I'm going to talk for a little bit and then pass it to Matilda, E, and Yasmin to read from their contributions, and then we'll get into a discussion. So we really do want to have, encourage you to ask whatever questions come up. This book, it's really interesting the way I was thinking about how to set this up. Like I moved to Asheville in 2016, where Firestorm is, in this like location, and was working at the University of North Carolina at Asheville, where they have a history of doing a queer studies conference. I think it had been maybe 20 years of history, and they were looking for people to get involved. And I was like, oh, I'm going to do that. I'd come to Asheville, a sort of change in my job situation, thinking I was going to like just live my life out in all the ways I wanted to, in terms of like transitioning, but also just being very explicitly anarchist, because like kind of navigating under wraps in academia beforehand was like
this is a they. This is a they. This is not a male, this is not a female, this is a they. How do we know this is a they? Pop quiz for the chat for people who have watched Queer Marxism with me before. How do we know that this person is a they? Let's see how you guys, I love doing pop quizzes in the chat for people who are new here, because pop quizzes tell me how much you guys are learning, and this is, after all, a learning thing. We might make fun of it and we might drink beer and stuff, but this is about learning. How do we know this person is a they? They are non-binary because they're a socialist. Bot, tell me more. Why does being queer mean this person is a they? They identify as queer. They don't conform to gender norms. Keep going. You're going down the road. How do we know this person is a they? Introduced as queer. Yes! Sassy me with the gold star. Because the stated goal of queer Marxism, queer theory, is to abolish the gender binary, to liberate us from the gender binary. Anytime you see someone non-binary, that means they are fundamentally rejecting the gender binary. This is not to be confused with trans. Trans people do not reject the gender binary. Trans people are not trying to abolish the gender binary because they're quite literally transitioning from male to female or from female to male. The difference between normal trans and like LGBT people and queer people is that normal trans and LGBT people uphold the gender binary. Queer activists, queer Marxists reject the gender binary and are trying to abolish it. And this is really, 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 really important, guys, because the abolishment of the gender binary is fundamentally a direct attack, not only on our societal norms, it is fundamentally designed to destabilize the system, but it is also a direct attack on the nuclear biological family. Trans people are not an attack on the nuclear biological family. Queer people are an attack on the nuclear biological family because Marxists and communists want to eliminate the biological family because they don't want you to have ties to anyone before you have ties to the state. They want to eliminate all parental rights. They want all children to be raised by the state in a collective care. We watched if you have questions about this, you can go watch last week's Socialism Saturday, where we talked about social reproduction theory, and they go more into the abolition of the biological family. Very good, guys.
So I was allowed to get onto this this committee and then be one of the co-chairs of organizing it. And so I was like, I'm going to hijack this towards radical organizing. And I was just thinking, like, you know, in this current moment where it's incredibly frightening, the explicit violence against trans people in particular and queer people.
Hang on. This is not correct. This is not correct. Whoever you have been listening to has taught you incorrectly. Touche says, I don't disagree. The problem is there is a boom in non-gender dysphoric trans people. These are not trans people. Essentially Q. So realistically, the distinction is not moot. Guys, the distinction is not moot at all. In fact, this is the piece that's going to be going up on my Substack tonight. One of the key pillars that needs to be upheld to defeat these people is the gender binary. If you are conflating trans people with queer people, you are helping them win. Because trans people uphold the gender binary. You want them to uphold the gender binary. Queer people want to abolish the gender binary. If they abolish the gender binary, they win. Anyone that wants to uphold the gender binary, I don't care if you like trans people or not, they are on our team. Anyone that wants to abolish the gender binary is not on our team. So no, the distinction is not moot. And if you are telling people the distinction is moot, you are letting them win. If you are teaching people that the distinction is moot, you are supporting them in their goals. If you are proceeding in this space saying there's no difference between trans and queer people, you are supporting them. If you have questions about that, nope. I don't care. Okay, so here is why queer people are calling themselves trans. Because queer people are explicitly trying to hijack the and have been very successful at it. They've been doing it since 2015 or so. Well, they started doing it before that, but really dug in their heels around 2015. Queer activists, queer Marxists have hijacked the LGBT movement and are using it for their purposes. It does not matter if they call themselves trans. Stop letting them define things. Stop bending the knee to what they want. When you bend the knee to what they want, they win. It does not matter if they call themselves trans. If they are arguing for the abolishment of the gender binary, they are not trans. They are non-binary. They are queer Marxists. Trans is an identity. Queer is a far-left political ideology. So if you are allowing the queer Marxists, the people hijacking the movement, to dictate to you what the definition of trans is, you are fundamentally allowing them to set the rules of the game, which means they're going to win. Why are you allowing them to set the rules of the game? These are standard definitions. This is logic. You know? So stop giving them wins. Stop handing them wins on a silver platter by accepting their definitions. Let's see. Bess says, Carlin, sincere question. I've seen women who claim to be non-binary and have mastectomies. If you are non-binary, what difference do breasts make? Not being a smartass. Beth, actually, you know what? The answer for you is in the introduction to transgender Marxism. They explicitly and transgender Marxism is about queer Marxism. Don't let the title confuse you. Just because they call, again, to this point, just because they call it transgender doesn't mean they mean transgender, because they don't believe in transitioning from one gender to the other. They actually say in the introduction in the transgender Marxism book that you and I are both supposed to be reading but are procrastinating on, that having surgery is your ultimate commitment to the cause. It is like the highest form of sacrifice you can make as a Marxist to show your loyalty to this movement. So it's not about, it is about making the ultimate sacrifice to the political ideology that they see themselves as being a part of. Does that make sense? Because they flat out say in the book, like, if you have surgery, what is the word for, like, you can't undo it? You can't undo it. Like, it is a permanent commitment to the political cause. That's why they do it. And they wear those scars, right? They wear those scars like badges of honor, don't they? Cool, man. Listen, sometimes I get a little frustrated. Sometimes I get a little heated because I have to explain this every single day of my life. I'm not trying to be a bitch about it. I just really want people to understand the difference. Let's see. Irreversible. Thank you, Mom of Cats. I could not think of that word. All right, let's keep going.
So in general, that's coming from the state, over and above the constant attacks that people have on the street. Like, I'm thinking about the different moments of making this.
Hang on, Tayton. I do appreciate the super chats, guys. What is the best book you can recommend for this? The best book I can recommend is subscribing to my Substack, Carlin, KARLIN.substack.com. No, for real though, I don't know of anyone else who's breaking it down like this. I am breaking it down on my Substack. So, and I do plan to write a book about this at some point, but it's gonna be a while, okay? So I would recommend subscribing to my Substack, because that's where you're gonna get like the most. I'm literally writing an article about this right now that should be up later tonight, is I guess what I'm saying. It's going to be a premium article. You're going to have to pay money for it. But I will be actually posting something about this specific topic later tonight. See, I got to be nicer to Tooch because he's like so new here. I got to be nicer. I apologize if I came off as a bitch. All right, let's keep going.
book from the initial conferences, there were 2 of them, to the editing and the increased contributions to now. There's like these different moments in sort of queer organizing that I was trying to think about, like where we've come and how we got here. In the initial moments, I was feeling, I mean, it was during the election.
And by the way, guys, and last thing I'll say, and I promise I'll let this play because I know we're already like, interrupting it a lot. But if you are new here and you're new to my content, welcome. You're getting thrown into the deep end tonight with Socialism Saturday. I would say, like, if you have questions, please ask questions, okay? If you're not understanding something, or if you're like, why is that like that? Please make sure you're asking questions in the chat. There are a lot of people who have been watching Socialism with me for the entire time that we've been doing Socialism Saturday, and so they might be able to explain it. I might be able to explain it. But I also want to say this, like, I really do want these streams to be about us learning. And so I'm not the one that has all the good ideas. I'm learning socialism by watching this stuff along with you guys. And so I definitely look for people in the chat to make comments about what they're seeing as well, observations they have, because this is about creating a community that's all learning this stuff together.
Where Donald Trump got elected. So there was a lot of like upset and anger, but the resistance that was coming out of that was very hopeful, and it was, really exciting to see trans and queer led organizing against Trump, but also, in terms of like kind of increasing capacity for mutual aid. And Asheville was the place where I landed, and that was like really happening. So coming to this conference and having a chance to organize an event hosted by a school with the school resources, with the idea of bringing together activists and academics and artists, a kind of meeting ground. I wanted to think about how we could like use the resources we had to support people doing this kind of work. So we chose a theme of abolition, right? Queer and trans abolition movements. And I thought, like, at the time, this was something that was like really, it had been building over a decade or so and was really coming to the fore. And the conference itself was just like a really special moment where like all of these people came onto this campus, and there's a lot of like connections that were made. Like I met Eve for the first time there, and we've gone on to collaborate. I've met a lot of like comrades that I've worked with from that, and I think a lot of other people made those connections. I talk a lot about this in my introduction about how this also led to the sort of unofficial ending of my career in academia, because I think going out in this radical limb did put me into a vulnerable position where I could be sort of punished for it. And that's where Davidson College came in, and people who had seen this conference and who did their own radical work and wanted to use their resources help support me in doing another iteration of the conference. And this is like the second sort of moment.
Hey, Bot, can you do me a favor? And the reason I'm asking Bot, just so you guys know, is because Bot is our chief investigative officer in the cult. She's like the best researcher we have. Bot, can you go on to Davidson College's website and find the radical, like, revolutionary queer theory conference that he's talking about? Just because I want to see it. If you feel like it, I would appreciate it.
That I'm thinking about in kind of queer organizing. So we had this sort of growing queer and trans-led abolitionist movement.
Beth.
And for the second conference, we focused on the perils of inclusion, because I think at this time, like with the visibility of trans and queer organizing, but also the way that like post the quote unquote transgender tipping point in 2014, there was this kind of concerted effort on the media to have to sort of represent more trans and queer lives. There's like maybe a kind of false sense of security that was coming, and we wanted to organize this conference to sort of question.
I don't know what's going on.
This idea that we could like sort of be safe, or that like there's this kind of progress narrative that's going to like wrap us into the fabric of the United States in any way that fits. And obviously we're living this out now. The other moment before that, though, before I get to now, was like, in the interim after these conferences that were like really exciting and had a, kind of wonderful ways of kind of bringing people together, the COVID pandemic sort of comes in, and then the George Floyd uprisings. And it's during this time that we're starting to work on the book.
The George Floyd, I still can't get over the fact that they call the summer of 2020 the George Floyd uprising or the George Floyd rebellion. Really think about that. They're trying, like, this is like an example of like the victors will write the history, right? They're trying to paint the summer of 2020 not as a summer in which there was a random autonomous zone created in the middle of Seattle in which several people died because they chased all the police out and let people have a summer of love in the middle of Seattle. Not the summer that had $2 billion of property damage, not the summer where we were literally glued to our TVs and our YouTubes watching people riot almost every single night during the summer. No. It was an uprising. It was a rebellion. It was a righteous action. This is what, like, we're literally watching the victors write the history right in front of us and distort what actually happened. And that should be a wake-up call for everyone. You know, if we don't win, these people are going to completely distort the story of this time that we're living through. Every single person who has tried to fight back against them is going to be written out of history or be portrayed as a traitor or a psychopath. Like, all the people who are on the right are going to be portrayed as QAnon conspiracy theorists forevermore because the victors write the history.
PM Press was just like, these conferences are cool. Do you want to do a book about it? Or, you know, make this into a book? And I was like, yes, let's do this. Like, bring in a lot of the contributors, but also bring in people, other writers and thinkers and organizers to contribute to it, to like make this a kind of like a varied collection. And this is in the spirit of the conference, which was like very inclusive. That one of the things I really liked about it is that you didn't have, it's not like a whole bunch of like quote unquote academic experts, but people like undergraduates, non-academics, incarcerated people. Like, we had all kinds of people involved in presenting. And so I wanted that spirit to kind of infuse the book, where we had a variety of voices, people who are like more seasoned writers and people who are publishing for the first time. But as we were like putting this together, the pandemic hit. And so there's like this new kind of moment of like fear, but also like hope that the sort of explicit abandonment of the state for us would like spur on more organizing and more revolutionary action, which we saw happen, you know, not in a one-to-one causal way with the George Floyd uprising. And so there's like another moment of like hope that like something could happen. Abolition comes into the mainstream in a way. But here we are.
So there's a lot in the chat of people in the chat discussing right now. Are the people that we watch on Socialism Saturday fringe activists? Well, they are in the same way that Nick Fuentes is fringe. They're the Nick Fuentes of the left. They're the extremists. And actually, there are people that are more extreme than Nick Fuentes, just so people know. Like they are fringe in the sense that like this is not what mainstream America believes, but these people are driving the talking points of the Democratic Party. And we know that because we can listen to literally these same people, not just like generalized socialists. We can listen to like the activists that we watch on Socialism Saturday from 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago, and the talking points that they were using 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago are the talking points of the Democratic Party today. So are these people fringe? Yup. As fringe as Nick Fuentes, as fringe as the real anti-Semites and the real white identitarians, which the right doesn't want to admit exist, but do absolutely exist. They 100% do. These are the woke on the left, okay? These are the authoritarian left. And so even though they are fringe, they are influential for people who are in power to implement their crazy, insane ideas. Also, these people are not just lecturing on YouTube channels. So for Autumn saying in the chat, they barely have 100 views on their YouTube channel. Well, this YouTube channel has 800 subscribers. So they're not going to have a lot of views. But guess what these people are doing? These people are professors in universities. They lecture in universities all the time. They tour around the country teaching these ideas in person at universities and in bookstores. YouTube numbers is not how we judge someone's success, because YouTube is not real life. What these people do is taught in major public and private universities all over the country, and their ideas are being implemented by the Democratic Party today. So they may be fringe, but they are extremely influential. And that is the point. Let's see, hang on. Tim Pool says the right is winning the culture war. Tim Pool is a fucking moron if he thinks the right is winning the culture war. Tim Pool is so disconnected from what's actually going on in the world. Tim Pool has Tim Pool thinks the right is winning the culture war because Tim Pool spends most of his time listening to people on the right who tell him they're winning the culture war. We're most influenced by the people that we listen to. Tim Pool listens to a lot of people on the right, and those people say, sure, we're winning. No, we're not. We're not in any way.
As the book is coming out, right after it's been a few years of working on this book, and I've just like I don't know, I'm very interested and excited to hear how people are receiving it, because I've like gone through all these stages, and we're in this moment now where whatever kind of feeling of progress that was happening seems to have, the door slammed shut on it, and there's like this kind of fearful atmosphere because of the way the United States is just piling on these anti-trans bills. We have this kind of so-called cult of feminism that's making its mission to target trans people. This has become such like a talking point, and organizing and rallying
that are
point of
targeting
fear,
trans people.
and creating
I love
a new
it.
moral panic. And arguably like is narrowing our potential revolutionary horizons by making us like fight just to maintain a bare minimum of safety and livability, by going to the courts and advocating for like non-death dealing policies, or trying to find politicians who aren't going to support this, right? This like is a kind of way to kill a movement. Or the multiple movements of queerness, and this is all in a wider atmosphere of fear of like that we see the disaster of capitalism wreaking havoc on the world. People are having a harder time just being able to survive, but we keep like going to work and doing these things. The targeting of the Stop Cop City movement, which is another attempt, like a bald-faced attempt of the state to target any kind of liberation movements, even like these something that's as popular as a Stop Cop City movement. So we've sort of started with like this hope and this idea that we're like gaining ground, but I kind of feel like in this moment,
have a good night.
There's like a real need to take stock of where we're at, and kind of like reach out to each other, identify each other in different places, and start thinking like, what can we do to kind of take, as I was trying to do with the institutions, take from institutions that we have access to and divert that into the kind of counterpower, prefigurative projects that we can do. And this is something I see happening right now a lot with different trans grassroots groups across the United States.
Hang on, got a super chat from Rottweiler. Thank you, Rottweiler. Exactly. People like the ones we're watching don't need YouTube because they are entrenched in academia and are way more influential. Even if they get canceled from social media, they still have their tenure in academia. That's exactly right. That is exactly right. Guys, when you are doing things in academia, that is how you reach the next generation. This is how they're reaching Generation Z, because they've got them trapped in colleges because they believe that they need to go to college to be successful in the world. And then they trap them in colleges and they require courses like what this person would teach as a required coursework for their ultimate degree, like an required like introductory seminar or what have you. And so academia, like even though most of us are very far removed from academia, when it comes to influencing the next generation and capturing the youth, academia is where they're doing it. And that's why they did their long march through the institutions and they took over the colleges and universities. They also took over the colleges of education that are training the teachers that are teaching your kids in K through 12 schools right now, which is why you all need to homeschool.
People are coordinating with each other to to like promote trans life and transition in the face of all these attempts to take away the possibility of transition. So this is sort of my introduction to the book. The book itself, I want, I'm excited for people to read it and see that we've like cover so many different perspectives in this book. There's a whole variety of tone and theoretical, political critiques, aesthetic ideas, and like intergenerational learning. So I think it just contains a lot of different possibilities in it. And so I'm very excited to have it out in the world and see what people make of it. But I'm particularly excited to have these three contributors here to share from their work. And we'll use that as a kind of starting point for our conversation afterwards. So I'm going to stop here. And as again, as you have questions, put them in the Q&A, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. And I'm going to pass it over to Matilda now to read from what she wrote for the book.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for coming this evening. It's great to be here
Oh
with
my,
all of you.
Another day.
My piece in the book is about a very specific moment. It takes place at the beginning of the pandemic, approximately April 2020 to October 2020. So it's a moment we're all very familiar with. In some ways, it feels like it was just the other day. And in some ways, it feels like it's impossible to imagine. So I want to go into the present of that moment. And I'm just going to read from just the first 1 to 2 pages of the piece.
Hang on. Got a super chat from Naruto. Carlin, sorry. Oh, hang on. Carlin, sorry for you DMing you that Matt Walsh Nightmare Fuel on Twitter the other day. Thank you, Naruto, for the super chat. That kind of makes up for it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Things that make me feel less lonely. I dream that I'm walking into a public square during some kind of street festival. And there are a bunch of styly, punkish weirdos who are excited to see me. Maybe this is what I'm always looking for, a sudden home in someone else's eyes. And now we are here together. The sky is orange and red, and everyone is flailing their arms. And so I join them.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Someone leans his back against mine, and we start dancing like that. Our bodies moving slowly around, arms up in the air, and we're leaning against one another. Movement rolling over movement, so we can fly. The feeling of his neck against mine, looking up at the sky for a moment, and everything in my body says yes. Even though I know I'll smell like someone else's smoke and booze and sweat, I'm ready to make out as lips roll over neck, except then I remember the coronavirus.
Oh my!
And I pull myself awake in fear before our lips meet. I try to get back to that space where my whole body comes alive in anticipation, but all I can sense is exhaustion.
Oh, that was great.
For those of us growing up, knowing that touch meant violence, that it could never be safe, that we would never be safe. I wonder about the long-term ramifications of this time when so many of us are avoiding touch for our safety and the safety of others. I've spent so long trying to find the physical intimacy in my life that I crave. The physical intimacy that feels like safety. the safety I never experienced as a child. And leaving touch behind, especially in a time of fear, feels like going back to that traumatized place.
Oh God, Beth.
Embodiment for me is a bridge between trauma and possibility. And it's harder to feel this without feeling it with other people. I just don't want touch to become impossible again. Hold me. Wait, don't hold me. Do you see what I mean?
I mean, Owl was bringing up like a really good point in the chat. Like, yeah, whatever. Some of us survived the AIDS crisis, but his dance buddy smells like COVID. I mean, that's exact. Can you okay. So I was really young when like the AIDS crisis was happening in the 90s. Like I remember a little bit of it because they were talking about it in school and stuff. But like when the AIDS crisis was happening, this was a genuine problem. This was something that like people didn't understand where it came from. They didn't understand how people got it. It was actually killing people. Like, I mean, like really quickly killing people. And like that was an actual effing crisis I can't imagine being like someone who like lived through the actual AIDS crisis. Like everyone was like, people were terrified. And it wasn't just gay men either, although gay men were definitely like, you know, the primary ones that it affected at the very beginning. But there was a whole big thing with sending, like, there were kids who got AIDS through blood transfusions because they didn't know how to test the blood, but they didn't know to test the blood before they did the transfusion. So there were children that got AIDS through blood transfusions, right? Like those kids were ostracized in schools because they didn't know how it was transmitted and stuff like that. And it's like, for people who lived through that, like, you're telling me COVID was a bigger problem than the AIDS crisis? No, it wasn't. Sorry. Number 2, not so fun fact. In 1930s Germany, guess where people were taught how to be Nazis? Higher education. Huh. That doesn't surprise me at all, number 2, but that definitely is an interesting fact, if not a fun one, but interesting.
I had no idea that I could hate this country even more than I did before. But then I'm screaming on my balcony at 8 p.m. the way we do. And I hear some guy yell, "That's not how you do it."
Yeah, Ryan White, exactly.
I can't see him, so I don't know if he's talking to me, but I yell, "Tell me how to do it, baby." He screams. I scream. He screams. I scream. He screams. Who says you can't have sex without touch?
If you want to watch I think it was like a mini series about the AIDS crisis. It was like a movie in 2 parts, and it's called "And the Band Played On." It's a great, like, I was thinking about it the other day. Like if you can find it like on demand or somewhere, and the band played on, I think it was like on HBO, definitely give it a watch. Like if you want to know what like a real pandemic was like and what it was actually like back in like the 80s around the AIDS crisis, that'll give you a good education.
For those of us going without touching any other human being for this long, do we have a sense of what happens after? I mean, how to make it better, this touch, when it returns? More intimate, more solid, more fluid, more constant, more evolved, more comfortable, more dependable, more present, more consistent.
Thank you, Murphy Spool.
More expressive.
Appreciate it.
More honest, more whole, more sensual, more supportive, more emotional, more grounded, more open. That feeling in my body that I don't have to hold everything in, that I don't have to hold everything on my own, that I can let go, that I can let the world in. This is what I've wanted for a long time. Wait, the police station in Minneapolis is burning, and we are watching. And then we are in the streets too. Thank you. That's just the beginning of my piece. And now I'm going to turn it over to E.
E is a teacher at the University of Minnesota.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was
Oh God.
beautiful.
Thank you, Hunter Biden's
Kiali,
mustache.
hello everyone. My name is E. Ornelas. You can just call me E. I prefer no pronouns, they, them is also fine. Just as an accessibility measure, I hope everyone can hear me, but please let folks know if you can't, and then I can put on a headset. Also, as a visual description, I'm a light-skinned brown person with a long black mullet with a
brown person. Does this person look brown? This person doesn't look brown to me. Does anyone think this person looks brown? Anyone in the chat? If you were to do a description of this person, would it be a brown person with a mullet? Yeah, this person is lily white. This person is not brown. I'm sorry. Yasmin is brown.
Streak of sort of a blondish yellow down one side, and I'm wearing some hoop earrings with little red hearts on them, a white shirt that says Prison Abolitionist Trans Liberation, and behind me is a cream colored wall. I'm going to read some selections from the chapter that I
apologize,
wrote
Yasmin.
telling our stories.
I just meant that like you describing your skin color would be more close to like what the color brown would be than her. I didn't mean to be offensive or anything, Yasmin. Obviously you're black. See, now I feel bad.
Black and Indigenous abolitionists, de-narrativizing the carceral state. And I'm going to do a little bit from the beginning and a little from the end, and hopefully it'll skip over most of the academic nonsense in the middle. But if you're interested in what I have to say, you can obviously pick up the book and read the whole thing. In Why Indigenous Literatures Matter, Daniel Heath Justice, a Cherokee author, considers stories to be of utmost importance for Indigenous peoples. Justice delineates between stories that wound and stories that heal. The former being the dominant settler colonial narratives told about Native and First Nations peoples on Turtle Island, that is North America. These stories, ranging from incomplete to downright toxic, are harmful. Quite likely any person, Indigenous or not, growing up on this continent could have called upon regurgitate these stories that wound. False images of brave explorers penetrating untouched virgin land, false images of Thanksgiving or more accurately Thanks-taking meals involving happy patriarchal nuclear families of pilgrims and natives, young, properly heterosexual Indigenous cis women who fall in love with benevolent white cis men, the progress of westward expansion bringing Christian sexual norms, primitive savages who antagonize settlers with deviant gender identities and expressions, or noble savages who are able to adapt and assimilate to Euro-American ideals. I argue that stories that wound are an integral part to the carceral state. These stories supply the justifications for how the carceral state purports to mete out justice and redress harm, and excuse the violence inherent to it. My approach makes the case that Black feminist, queer, and trans theorizations of the slave state, as well as of Indigenous, feminist, indigiqueer, and two-spirit critiques of the settler state, are indispensable for more thorough and enriched queer and trans abolitionist conceptions of the carceral state. The development of the slave state and the settler state are not discrete meaning-making practices, but are concomitant, parallel phenomena that culminate in the carceral state.
Tayton asks, prison abolition is trans abolition. What does that mean? So essentially they're talking about like in this, okay, if other people have ideas about this, please put them in the chat. What I'm going to say is they view the so inherently these people want to abolish the prison industrial complex, which I'm going to be honest, I don't necessarily actually disagree with. I think the prison industrial complex is irredeemable and it's so corrupt that it's unfixable. And so on this point, I actually do tend to agree with them. But on the trans thing, what this means is that like trans people in prison aren't put in the right prisons based on their transness. And so if you abolish the prison industrial complex, you will liberate the trans people from the oppression of the prison industrial complex, essentially. Or that maybe like trans people go to prison at like they think it's like a higher rate or something like that. If anyone else has ideas, I would be open to hearing them, but I'm pretty sure that's what they mean.
Both are central to the creation of the US state as an othering and punishing apparatus. And as Black as Resistance, Zoe Samudzi and William C. Anderson cite the forced kidnapping, trade, and servitude of Africans alongside indigenous.
So Tayton continues, but if they are queer, why are they so concerned if so this is the thing. These people are trying to hijack the queer activist movement. Or excuse me. Let me start again. These people, the queer Marxists, are trying to hijack the trans activist movement. Okay? Like trans activism is like a real thing. Like, you know, trans people are real. At least I think they are. You might disagree, but I think they are. There are real trans people in the world. I don't think there are as many as people think there are. But it is a real thing. And so there was the LGBT movement for LGBT rights, which kind of culminated in 2015 with the legalization of gay marriage. That was a legitimate movement that was necessary to bring about change to make the system more fair for all, more equality. I will say that. When gay marriage got legalized, there was no longer a problem to fight for. And so what these people did, the queer people, is they came in and hijacked a pre-existing movement. So they will pretend to be trans. They will pretend that they care about trans people, but they don't. They only care about advancing the queer ideology, which is a far left political ideology. And they're trying to hijack a pre-existing movement in order to do that and in order to confuse people. That's why, like, we have to make sure we're really clear about this in our heads, because these people will call themselves trans when they're not trans. They're doing that to take advantage of a pre-existing movement to gain more power, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia, which are always and forever their four goals. Well, these people actually do believe that gay marriage is bad. They call it homo-normativity. They think that normal gay people getting married, settling down, having kids and a dog and a house and all that, they call that homo-normativity, which is basically gay people trying to act like straight people, and they don't like it. VT Num says they are hijacking because Marxism is a perpetual revolutionary system. They need an issue to wedge themselves into to bring in the Marxist utopia. That is exactly right. White Wizard Alex says they're using not LGBTQ. They're using LGBT as a shield by stapling the Q onto the LGBT. Carlin, how do you feel about trans prisons? That would solve the problem, and I think we are rich enough to establish a trans prison in all 50 states. I mean, well, then you have the question of, like, is it a trans men prison and is it a trans women's prison? I mean, how many trans people are there in prison? You know, I mean, it really... So I have mixed feelings about this, because I do not like that men are getting convicted of crimes and sent to prison, and then all of a sudden these men are like, I'm trans, and then they're getting sent to a woman's prison to be put in a cell with women when they're not really trans. They're just saying they're trans to get put in a women's prison. That's some bullshit, and I don't like that. On the other hand, I know a trans woman who is in prison right now that is an actual trans woman that is in a men's prison. And I'm kind of like, and I'm not BFFs with this person or anything, but I worry for her. I do. Like, I can't imagine that that's a good experience. And so as much as I don't want men who are not trans being in women's prisons, I'm also like, if a trans woman gets sent to a men's prison, I don't like that. That like a legitimately it's just like it doesn't sit well with me. I don't know what the solution is to this. Maybe it is separate prisons. I don't know. But I guess I don't know. I don't know how I feel about the idea of trans-specific prisons because I don't know if there are enough trans people to fill the specific prisons. But maybe there are. We already waste enough money on the prison industrial complex. Why not waste a little more, I guess?
Genocide as both, quote, intrinsic to American settlement, end quote. To demonstrate these intrinsic foundations, I, in this essay, provide an overview of the white supremacist settler colonialism that informs the carceral state today.
Autumn, I don't actually disagree with this. Prison should be segregated based on violent versus non-violent crime. I don't actually disagree with this. The person that the trans woman that I know that's in prison is in prison for selling effing Bitcoin. So they didn't commit a violent crime. They literally sold Bitcoin. And so, I think that idea kind of makes sense. Autumn and I agree. Broken clocks are right twice a day.
I discuss the othering narratives of certain bodies and lives, in particular those of Black and Indigenous individuals who identify as queer, transgender, gender nonconforming, and or two-spirit, which marks them as needing to be controlled through a myriad of punitive practices. In this chapter, I then present the how of carcerality and the carceral state, rather than which specific institutions, ideologies, and discourses have taken shape. So to give texture to this investigation into the how this has happened, I ask guiding questions like, how do othering narrative regimes inform the carceral state? How do these very narratives create the conditions of possibility for carcerality? How do they justify and bolster certain practices? How has this endured for centuries, in particular harming Black and Indigenous peoples deemed deviant and less than for their gender identities and sexual orientations? These questions are best answered through what Seneca Nation scholar Mishwana Goman calls remapping and unsettling settler narratives. Intervening into or unsettling the stories that wound requires a practice of digging into and exposing their roots, and simultaneously emphasizing and affirming the importance of Indigenous peoples and people of color. Goman's practice of remapping and unsettling is helpful in articulating the conceptual resonances between dominant narratives of the slave, settler, or carceral state throughout the last 500 years. So skipping ahead, all of this is to say that stories matter, right? Stories have an impact. If the dominant ones told about Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities have wounded and continue to wound, specifically by justifying the deadly punishment doled out by the carceral state, then any attempt to tear down and exist outside and in spite of these conditions must confront these stories. Overall, I see the stories told about Black and Indigenous peoples to be central to the carceral practices that need to be combated by us abolitionists. Conversely, the stories told by Black and Indigenous, feminist, queer, trans, or nonconforming, and two-spirit people help to challenge policing, prisons, and punishment.
I don't disagree with that,
I'm in no way
Elena.
saying that to be Black is the same as to be Indigenous or vice versa, but what I am arguing is that to be either or both means that narratives that are not of our own making are foisted upon us. These narratives have formed parallel justifications and valences of othering as it pertains specifically to the carceral state. For instance, Black and Indigenous peoples are both overrepresented in incarcerated
I agree with that too,
populations.
Sandy.
If these stories that wound precipitate these kinds of parallel effects, then it behooves those of us who are invested in prison abolition to investigate and counter them and to create our own. However, the narratives of the slave settler carceral state belie the continued existence, resistance, and survivance of Black and Indigenous lives that exceed the forces that seek to control, punish, and kill with impunity. We certainly need to tell our own stories of lives that have not been entirely determined by, and indeed have forged sociality in spite of, the restrictions and violences of the slave settler carceral state. These are what Daniel Heath Justice might call stories that heal, or alternative visions that speculate beyond the many harmful narrativizations that I lay out in this piece. At the same time, a dream of abolition from BIPOC communities must also counter these stories that wound, right, by denarrativizing the othering lies that the slave settler carceral state requires to define itself in relation to. Following the abolitionist and decolonial practices of Black and Indigenous feminist, queer, trans, gender nonconforming, and two-spirit theorizations of the slave settler carceral state, attempted to remap and unsettle white supremacist, settler, colonial, cis heteropatriarchal narratives by exposing them as the constructed fictions that they are.
That was quite a mouthful. Let's listen to that again. Unsettle white supremacist, settler, colonial, cis narratives. I think there was also like a heteronormative there. Let's listen to that little like word salad again.
Attempted to remap and unsettle white supremacist, settler, colonial, cis heteropatriarchal narratives by exposing them.
Unsettle unsettle white supremacist, colonial, cis heteropatriarchal narratives. Does everyone know what those words mean? Unsettle white supremacist, colonial, cis heteropatriarchal narratives. White supremacy is capitalism. Colonial means like it's like you're a colonizing like force, like an empire. Cis is about the gender binary. Hetero is also about the gender binary in a roundabout way. Patriarchal is about, again, the gender binary, if we're honest. Like, it's all about the fucking gender binary. Alien, you understand it? Awesome. Awesome. Well, no, Autumn, by colonial, you mean bourgeois. You don't mean fucking invader. You mean bourgeois.
Them as the constructed fictions that they are. It is only by exposing and unsettling these narratives as centuries-long stories that wound, which prop up attempts to dictate lived realities, that we can then see we are living, in Christina Sharp's words, a past that is not past. We are living with the historical resonances in the present day, and we must do the work of denarrativizing them to resist retelling them.
Pop quiz. Why does the woke left, and I haven't taught this explicitly before, I'm working this out in my head how to explain it, so we're going to do it live. Why does the woke left focus so much on the colonizer, the colonizer, the colonizer? Why do they hate colonizers so much? Does anyone have any ideas? I'm formulating a theory and I want to know what you guys think as well. Autumn just called them an invader. I told Autumn they were the bourgeois. What does it mean that they're the bourgeois? Well, they use capitalism, sure, but what specifically? What specifically? Colonizers bring... Yes, Shannon! The land. The land. That's what they want. Because socialists and communists want to abolish all private property. The ultimate form of private property is land, mother effers. The colonizers, the so-called colonizers, come in and take the land. And the woke left doesn't like that they take the land because they don't want private property to exist, which is why they have to demonize them as colonizers. Nope, this is not correct. The whole Western thing is a right-wing talking point. It's not a left-wing talking point. It is not about Western civilization or Western values or Western ideals or anything like that. Those are literally white identitarian talking points, and you really shouldn't use them. Colonizers reinforce capitalism because they take the land. They are the private property owners. They are the bourgeois. Exactly. The so-called gentrifiers also buy up the land. Exactly. Exactly. Well done, guys.
Patsukamati, thank you so much. I'm going to pass it along now.
Hi, everyone. I assume everyone can hear me all right. Thank you so much again to everyone, to Firestorm, to Scott, for everyone for arranging this event. And of course, this incredible book. So what I'm going to read is a sort of extraction.
Hang on.
From my chat.
I want to acknowledge what Mary Kay says. Mary Ann McKay says, "My bad, I will not speak of Western civilization again." Listen, guys, I understand why people are saying it's Western civilization and Western values and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I understand why people are saying that, because this is a talking point that came out of the IDW that was fed to the IDW by really not good people on the right. Like, the origin of language matters. And one of the reasons that we listen to Socialism Saturday, and we actually do listen to what the left says, is it helps us to understand their talking points. They have never once, not once, talked about Western civilization. And to be honest, guys, if we look at like non-Western civilization, there's a lot of things that the woke left does not like about non-Western civilization as well. Intellectual dark web, it was this thing that happened in like the Trump years, essentially, which was like, you know, so-called thought leaders on the internet that did nothing but talk. Anyway, my point is that I understand why people are saying that, because these ideas were propagated widely. This is all about they're attacking Western civilization, Enlightenment values, Western civilization, Enlightenment values, yada, 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 yada. But when you understand where these ideas come from, which is Marxism, and you actually listen to them, they don't talk about that at all. And so if we can't find examples of the Marxists and the socialists and the communists talking about something, but the only examples that we have are of the political right talking about that thing, then we have to say that is a right-wing talking point. That is not a left-wing talking point. And it's just about keeping ourselves intellectually honest. But if people have examples of actual socialists writing, like talking about like wanting to destroy Western civilization, let me know. But I haven't seen it. And so for right now, I'm going to assume that is a right-wing talking point that came out of white identitarians, because in the white identitarian movement, the reason I say it came from there is because Western kind is what they call white people in the white identitarian movement. Western kind. If you hear the term Western kind, that is a white identitarian. I promise you, that's not a good person that you're hearing that from. The IDW are attackers of Dark Brandon. I don't know what that means, Hunter Biden's Coke Stash, but I appreciate the super chat. Socialism wants to abolish individual humans and transform humans into a quasi-Borg hive singularity utopia. No, I mean, you're not. Listen, bro, there are a lot of people outside of Western culture that are individualists. You're literally saying that half the world are collectivists. China is collectivist. China is. We do not use this term on my channel. Anytime you see the term anti-white, this is a white identitarian. We do not use this term on my channel. You're getting warned this one time. If you use that term again, you will be banned, because I'm not attracting that bullshit to my channel. Absolutely not. Anytime you see the term anti-white, these are generally the most toxic people on the internet, and I would stay as far away from them as you possibly can. Anyway, back to this. You are literally saying that half the world are collectivists, and that's not true. You are advancing a right-wing talking point that you don't understand the origins of, and you can hang around and try to catch up to what these people actually think, but these people don't think that. Thanks for the money, but your super chat was fundamentally incorrect. It's not Nick Fuentes advancing that, Autumn. It's people that are way worse than Nick Fuentes, I promise you. If I had to choose between a leftist authoritarian state and a right-wing authoritarian state, or a straight-up zombie apocalypse, which would I choose? Right now, if I had to choose, I personally would fare far better in a leftist authoritarian state than a right-wing authoritarian state. And so it pains me, but if I only had these three options, leftist authoritarian, right-wing authoritarian, or zombie apocalypse, I would choose leftist authoritarian, because I personally would fare better in a leftist authoritarian state than all the other ones. All right, let's keep going.
Which is titled The End of Gay History, or This Is Not the World We Asked For. And what I'm basically arguing is that gay marriage caused the suffering that we see. with.
Oh,
I was using the wrong bluff.
she's the one that hates gay marriage. Why does she hate gay marriage? Because gay marriage led to LGBT people assimilating to heteronormativity, which they call homonormativity, which they think is bad. Gay marriage to these people was a bad thing because it basically made people like want to just live like normal, like happy lives, and they don't like gay people living normal lives. But let's let her explain.
That the gay marriage caused the suffering that we see with COVID-19. So I'll just begin. The problem with gay marriage, a movement that we have, I think, not theorized enough, the problem with gay marriage is not that it's a patriarchal, heteronormative institution. The problem with gay marriage is that it's a movement that led to other conservative gay movements like inclusion in the military and hate crimes legislation that, in collusion with gay marriage, allowed the last shreds of resistance to neoliberalism to be torn apart. Gay marriage led—
Oh God, this is going to be great. Rottweiler says, not even Marx talked about Western civilization. That's right. Marx did not talk about Western civilization, much less his successors in their literature. And I made the same mistake believing it at first. And this is why, guys, like, I understand why people believe that talking point, because it's been repeated so much. So no skin off anyone's back if you believe that talking point, but we need to start just like hinging ourselves into reality. Marx didn't talk about Western civilization. That means these people don't care about Western civilization. That was never the point. It was always about capitalism. It was about overthrowing capitalism. That's what, and instilling their Marxist utopia. That's it.
Led to the gentrification of AIDS, making the gay disease something that wealthy gay white men in particular could be protected from. Gay marriage led—
The gentrification of AIDS? That seems a little heartless. Congratulations on that bingo, Rochelle.
To the end of the last consistent movement for the institution of universal healthcare, a fight that continues to meet resistance even as millions suffer and die. Gay marriage, in short, led to the increase of suffering we see in the COVID-19 era. Let me state that as bluntly as possible. If gay marriage had never been won, if it had never been even a fight to begin with, and if the gay community at the time had continued after the quote-unquote end of AIDS to take on other and more relevant issues, including the end of the prison industrial complex and the military expansion of the United States, we would not be where we are today. At the time of this writing, the country has seen over 1 million deaths, and the number of infections hovers at around 90 million. Given the United States' rudimentary healthcare system and its long-standing impulse to deny reality, these are both more than likely undercounts.
Oh, someone has the long-standing impulse to deny reality, honey.
Undoubtedly be much higher. COVID-19 has demonstrated that the United States is not only the world's leader in deaths and infections, but that the supposedly richest country in the world has a healthcare system so broken that all we can do
is stand back
in shock
also got a bingo.
and watch
Congratulations.
as the numbers escalate every day. All of this could have been prevented if we had healthcare freely available to all without the requirement of marriage or employment. It's not so much—
There it is. Gay marriage is bad because gay people shouldn't have been fighting for gay marriage. They should have been fighting to overthrow capitalism so we can all get universal health care. There it is. At Sin, when the zombie apocalypse happens, I will take them all out for you. Oh, Hunter Biden's Coke stash. Isn't that nice of you to protect Sin? Sin must be protected at all costs.
Much that the virus kills people, but that robust healthcare and other social systems could help keep them alive and get them back on their feet. Here in the US, the poorest were told to continue serving as fast food workers, delivery persons, and frontline workers without even the hope of tests at the time. Today, vaccines, of course, exist, But at the time of this writing, little is known about their long-term efficacy and effects. More importantly, the structural problems of distribution in the United States, now exposed as substandard, and the massive amounts of poverty, not just inequality, but actual gaping, festering poverty, will mean that COVID-19 will continue to blight millions while remaining something of no concern to the elites. How, you might ask, could gay marriage, that wonderful thing, possibly be responsible for all this?
Indeed.
What might be the connection
Indeed,
between AIDS
Yasmin.
and COVID-19?
Indeed.
And for the in the chapter, I sort of go through this historical analysis of how all of that came to be. But I'll just skip ahead and go to the endish of the chapter. What if we had not suffered that depletion of political energy with the fight over HIV/AIDS? What if the mainstream gay movement, now so large and ubiquitous that it is referred to as Gay Inc., had not swooped in and distorted that struggle? What if it had not turned the very fact that people were dying from a lack of healthcare into a reason to then deny healthcare to millions of others by demanding that it should be yoked to marriage? What if it had not thus reified the idea that it was perfectly okay to live in a world where employers should be the guarantors of healthcare? That moment when the idea of universal healthcare just slipped between the cracks and then disappeared from our radar until now has been severely under-theorized. Today, as this country deteriorates into a death spiral, that has not changed since the time of this writing. We are seeing...
Are we deteriorating into a death spiral? Did I miss the memo that we're in a death spiral? Does anyone else feel like we're in a death spiral? And yes, I too have questions about the accent. She has a very upper class British accent, very upper crust. Vince says, is it just me, or does this relatively posh accent of this lady undermine the populism of her complaints? Why does she have such an upper crust British accent?
Things get
fucking British, ruin everything again. No offense to any Brits in the chat, but they do.
Worse and worse. Medical costs are the leading cause of bankruptcies in this country. It needs repeating. At the time of this writing, the United States, ostensibly the world's richest country, leads in...
Brits think they can bring their fucking national healthcare service over to us and we don't want it. She literally is the bourgeois. Exactly. Hang on. Well, Autumn, you're also a socialist, so that makes sense. You do ruin everything. You also pretend to be a man when we know you're a woman, Autumn. She's literally the bourgeois.
In COVID-19 deaths and infections. Medical care has never been so lacking, and the bodies and infections are piling up. It never had to be this way. This was never the future we needed or wanted. This was never the world we asked for. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Matilda, Ian, Yasmin, for sharing from your texts. Yeah, that was really wonderful. And I mean, I guess I wanted to take a few minutes just to see if anyone and any of you had any thoughts that you want to like respond to each other. I saw like new connections among these as I heard them, like this kind of the idea of stories, like this, that the work of kind of racial capitalism and the state works through a certain kinds of storytelling, and Matilda is offering a kind of hopeful myth in the midst of panic, and Yasmin's like retelling a history to give us an understanding of a kind of critical story of how we got here. So that was like something that just came to mind. But yeah, I want to throw it to you if any of you want to respond to each other or pick up on anything.
Well, one thing I was noticing is all of our pieces are responding to a present moment that is no longer here, right? And yet it is continuing in different ways. And one thing in particular I was thinking about with Yasmin's piece, it reminded me of, you know, when I was 19 and I was in ACT UP, and I went to the March on Washington, the big gay March on Washington, 1993, and we had this idea we were gonna have this mass civil disobedience for universal health care. And we planned it all out. We were gonna, you know, get arrested on the Capitol steps, which is very easy. You just cross the line and they arrest you. And we thought we would have like hundreds or maybe 1,000 people. The march, there were 1 million people at this march. And instead we had 41, that was all we had. We did get arrested and we did, you know, go to jail and we did, you know, have a court, you know, date, etc. But obviously it was not a mass movement. And instead, the mass movement of that moment, 1993, was organizing for gay inclusion in the military. So you have like 1 million gay people in white t-shirts saying that we deserve, you know, to be part of.
Oh, you went to that March illustration
you know,
station?
the most
How
violent
funny.
institution in the world, you know, responsible for the most. So instead of something that would help everyone to live, universal health care, like Yasmin is pointing out, instead of that, it became, how do we kill? How do we prove ourselves? And I think, you know, Yasmin points to the sort of legacy of the AIDS crisis, and this is in the moment before there are any meaningful treatments, before when people are dying, you know, within a year or 2 years, sometimes months. And instead of fighting for people to stay alive, this, you know, gay movement in its moment of assimilation, because this is really the moment of the crossing moment, you know, when of that kind of assimilation into state tyranny, you know, state power, into, you know, inclusion into the dominant hypocritical institutions, starting in that moment with the military. And so it's just bringing me back to that moment. I don't want to go on too long. We can continue to talk about it, but I think that foundational hypocrisy and the deaths, you know, Yasmin's talking about the deaths from the COVID-19. And in this moment, we're talking, you know, about the deaths, you know, Iraq, Afghanistan, on and on and on and on and on, right? And continuing to this day, of course. And I think, and to this day, right, of course, in that moment, I'll just continue a little more. In that moment, we're talking about gay inclusion in the military, right? This is 1993, 1994, 1995. And then just recently, a few years ago, you know, now we're talking about trans inclusion into the military, which, I mean, really, honestly, like anyone who I organized with, we would have said something like that as a satirical joke, right? It would, you know, because trans people, even now, don't even have a fraction of the power that gay people had in 1993. You know what I mean? Like, not even a fraction. And so instead of talking about, like, you know, how not to be killed just for being on the street, you know, how like not to have to leave your home or your school or your place of origin just to stay alive, how to get out of abusive families, Sandy. Or
it's
you know,
okay.
how to survive on the streets. You know, it's like, how do we go abroad and kill people and get away with it, right? And so it's that kind of tyranny and that hypocrisy that I think Yasmin is pointing to, that I just think about this, like this long view, right? And this is a
like
short
how Liberty
long
just got up and like
pieced out. Life. Of course,
Right.
it can go, you know, back further, and it will go more into this, you know, scary future that we're all resisting in this moment. But I'll leave it at that. But those are the things I was just thinking about.
And if I may, I love that you brought up that 93 March and that you brought up your own presence in it, Matilda. That sort of makes me feel like I had a connective link to you, even though we did not know each other, I think, at the time, because I was in grad school and my friends and I, who were the sort of the queer contingent in our department, were watching the march and kind of also being horrified. And at the same time, I remember, I think that was the one where Larry Kramer got on CNN and said something about, you know, he was interviewed by one of those famous, this is the time when CNN was actually a quote unquote big deal. And Larry Kramer was on CNN. That was a big deal to have a gay man with AIDS on CNN. And I remember him saying that all of this was bullshit. And it felt weirdly empowering at the time. But I also think, thinking back on it now and thinking back on what you're giving us, right, which is this history and what he calls, you know, the stories, right? What are the stories we tell, and how do we retell those stories, and how do we return to those stories and actually complicate those stories? So I'm thinking about you, Matilda, in that march, and me in my, room with my friends around me, all our queer friends at Purdue, but I know some of you
Really?
out here from Purdue,
Are you in North Carolina?
sitting there in 1993 and watching this kind of force of representation take over, right? And this idea that was going to be the most powerful way in which queers could achieve something. But, as you point out, like, what are the stories that remain? What are the stories we need to revisit? Certainly Larry Kramer's story needs to be revisited, but yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah, I'll also say I really appreciate both of both of your pieces, and also like what you're saying, Matilda, about to me, what is like the myth of like the slave settler carceral state, right? That there is this myth of inclusion. There is this like, that people have bought into this story. And so that narrative is exactly the kind of stuff that like, I do see as like the connective threads between some of our works. As long as people buy into and continue to like reproduce this story, this myth, this narrative that like, if we want it bad enough, if we try hard enough, we'll like get inclusion. And like, we know that's not even if we did want that, which I don't, like, that's still not even possible. So I think that's the kind of stuff that I want to interrupt. And
they don't want inclusion, they want revolution.
Really appreciate everything y'all have said to like help do that interrupting of stories, because these are absolute myths, and just recognizing that, I think, is maybe the first step, and also then crafting our own stories that counter them.
I think it's also interesting because, like, I work on Hijacking, who was part of the early gay liberation movement in France, and he already, like, within a year of gay liberation as a movement starting, was like, it's over, it's dead, it's fully exhausted itself in the act of coming out, which is this like force of representation, and like the ways that these tropes and storylines just like can take us over, right? Like even where you have the energy of a kind of radical liberatory movement, it can just like fall into this narrative. Like we keep stepping into the same thing over and over again. And that's why I see this.
When they say liberatory, liberate, abolish, what do they mean? Pop quiz for the chat. When they say things like liberatory, liberate, abolish, what do they mean? And while you guys are answering, I'm just going to check in over on Odyssey and Rockfin and Rumble. Thank you guys for watching me over there. I do appreciate it. Guys, please make sure you mount that like button of whatever platform you're watching on right now. Mounting the like button lets at least YouTube know to recommend the feed to more people so we can have more friends to come and join us. That's right. Kurt gets the gold star. They mean abolish capitalism. Anytime they're saying the words liberate or abolish or any derivation thereof, what they're ultimately saying is abolish capitalism. They might say liberate or abolish the prison industrial complex. They view that as a component of capitalism. We saw the presentation a couple weeks ago about liberating children from adult supremacy. Ultimately, they perceive adult supremacy to be a component of capitalism because they perceive children to be the private property of their parents, and they want to eliminate the children being perceived as private property so they can be raised by the collective. So anytime you guys hear them say those words, it is ultimately getting to the idea of abolishing capitalism. Well done, Kurt. But I would expect nothing less. Kurt's basically the smartest person here, all right? Including me. He's smarter than me by a lot. Kurt says private property denotes a limitation to the state. Private property is where the state cannot intrude, and they hate that. That's a really good definition, Kurt. Private property is where the state cannot intrude. I like that an awful lot.
This moment right now with the anti-trans attack as a crossroads where we like, maybe we can learn from the mistakes of gay liberation, from the abortion struggle, right? That we've seen like in this kind of glacial failure of 50 years or whatever. This is a question, of course, I don't have the answer. I saw that there was a question in the Q&A.
Reagan is getting a love letter,
and
apparently.
So as maybe we can like weave some of these questions into our discussion. This one was particularly for E. Do you have any advice? I'm going to read it. It's from Finn. Do you have any advice on how to uplift these healing stories without demanding a lot of labor from Black and Indigenous people, especially as a queer white person? And they note the irony in the question for asking you that.
It's all right. Yeah, I appreciate the recognition of that. Yeah, sorry, I need to like also read it because yeah, for me, I'm not as good of an auditory learner. Yeah, advice on how to uplift more healing stories. I mean, I think part of why I wrote this and wanted it to be included is just to continue to like speak back to the sorts of stories that we're so inundated with, that are so entrenched in this country's like the fabric of like again, the slave settler carceral state that we don't, a lot of us, you know, born into this society, indoctrinated into its lies, like we don't even realize it's the air we breathe, that so many of these things are the narratives, the lies, the myths about criminality, about punishment, about who's deserving.
Okay, this is not related to the presentation. I just want to share with you guys something about the beer I'm about to drink. So I didn't have time today to go get beer because like I was just doing other work, right? But Victor went and ran errands, and I said, and Victor was going to stop by the beer store anyway, and he said, Carlin, can I get you beer? Because he's a wonderful husband who loves me and takes care of me. And I said, sure, Victor, surprise me with whatever. You know what I like. I like fruity sours or nice like meaty stouts, and surprise me. And so Victor came back with a beer. He came back with several, but like I just want to show you guys this one. Check this out. Batter. It's from Kettlehead Brewing Company, and it's just called Batter. Hey God, adjust camera. Why won't it adjust? Anyway, this is a German chocolate cake imperial stout. This is 11.5% alcohol. So Victor is obviously trying to get me drunk for later. But it is a German chocolate cake beer. So I just have to say, cheers to my wonderful husband, who never lets me down, who always gets me the best beer. I hope you guys are all drinking something nice. That's going to be alcoholic, man. Look at that. We'll let that settle a little bit. Anyway, let's keep going.
Victim and an undeserving, you know, perpetrator of something.
Hang on.
All of these
You
are
can't
racialized.
see.
All of these
There
are
it
embedded
is.
within settler colonialism. And so I think first and foremost, it is about trying to recognize every time that comes up, you know, like if you can
hang on.
sort of try to do that work to like
I am
unlearn
absolutely
these
a
narratives
bougie
and
beer
recognize
drinker.
when they come up and like have that little like, you know, antenna go up every time you hear something and you think, that doesn't seem quite right. That doesn't track. That is absolutely a story that has been made up and told over centuries until people believed it is true. But it is still a story that's been constructed. And I think that's maybe like one of the first forms of advice I would give, is actually trying to counter these stories that wound. In terms of uplifting the stories that heal, I think it really is about trying to figure out where you are in the world, in movements. I myself am an instructor, and so I try and you know, prioritize queer and trans BIPOC authors in all that I do. So
yes,
no
because we should
what
only
kind
be
of class
listening
I'm
to
teaching,
people based on their
always,
identities.
that is like the baseline I'm starting from, and it is not as a supplement. It is not as a special, you know, a week on just like queer fiction or Black feminist thought. It is.
Hang on, we got a super chat from Rottweiler. Rottweiler says, land and children are the ultimate private property to abolish. Correct. Children become the agitators, and the regime uses them to expropriate, then discards them. And this is why we need to really make sure we're paying attention to this gender binary stuff. And again, I'm going to be posting an article about this on my Substack, carlin.substack.com, later tonight, assuming I'm not falling over drunk from this giant beer my husband got me. But I'm really going to try. Like, if they get, like, so abolishing the gender binary is a way to get to the nuclear family and eventually get to the children. So it's like this debate between trans and queer is not actually incidental, and it's not unimportant, because if people don't understand the difference between trans and queer, they're going to be fighting the wrong problem. And this is a problem that's actually important, because this problem, if they win, parental rights get abolished. You have no right to raise your children the way you want to. And eventually, you're not even going to be having your own children. So this is the fight to end all fights. If this goes the wrong way, we are totally and completely effed. So this is why I harp on this so much. Beth, thank you for the super chat. I think you need to get Victor something he likes. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. Say, oh, but I give Victor many things he likes, Beth. All right? Don't worry about it, Beth. Reagan, my kind of girl, and I will not apologize. Reagan always has people who have crushes on her in the chat. I just feel like this is the first time that someone has super chatted me in order to send love letters to Reagan. I appreciate the game, Hunter Biden's Coke Stash. I really do.
Is the groundwork from which I am operating as an instructor. And so I think wherever you are, whatever profession you do, or whatever organizing you do, wherever you exist in the world, right, countering the narratives,
This
or
is
like
so
at least
alcoholic.
having that little like red flag that goes up every time you hear it, and then at the same time countering it with these sorts of things that aren't, again, supplemental, but it is the groundwork from which like all of this is coming from. I mean, this resistance has been here for centuries, right? Like this isn't something new. If we're talking about, say, like the ongoing, not just the present moment of the repression of gender expansiveness, that's been happening for 500 years, right? So every time people bring that up, just maybe slip that in there, remind yourself of that, remind others of that, that this is like a moment that is just one of many moments to seek out and destroy other ways of living. So I would just say, try to find where you can sort of like tap into those stories that heal wherever you're at, and sort of feed them back in every time you kind of encounter the ones that wound.
Thanks, E. Thinking about that and going sort of back to Matilda's question too, I thought maybe it would be interesting to have you all reflect on the title of this collection, which I think I came up with. I don't even remember anymore who came up with this, but there's something provocative in it. I was gesturing towards certain strands in queer theory, but I think there's like, it's open to interpretation, and you all are kind of coming at it from different directions. So surviving the future, like what does that even mean?
None of them know what surviving the future means. This is great. None of them know.
I mean, it's interesting because I'm a huge fan of movies like The Terminator, which is all about the end of the world is here and we're all fucked. And Walking Dead, I think we've always been, but we seem to be especially intensely.
You know what I think is so ironic about these people is they lack so much self-awareness in that they literally don't realize that they are the ones that are arguing and fighting to create a dystopia. It goes completely over their head. They really do. When I say the 4 goals of the woke left are as follows: gain as much power as possible, destabilize the system, attack capitalism, usher in their Marxist utopia. I use the word utopia extremely deliberately because that is what they believe they are creating. They believe they are literally creating a utopia in which everything is going to be great and everyone's going to have so much time and everyone can be artists and you don't need to worry about anything because the state's going to take care of everything for you. They don't realize that they are literally ushering in a dystopia. They are fighting for a dystopia. No self-awareness at all.
right now in a moment where narratives around us keep telling us, it's all over, it's done. And I think, in terms of surviving the future,
Exactly.
I've always thought that strategic pessimism was a good way to actually move on, rather than thinking about, I know we use words like solidarity and so on, and I've organized, not as long as many people here, but I've organized for about, 20, 30 years at this point. And I think the mistake we always make in terms of thinking about the future is not to plan for the end of us, but also to assume that we have to, I don't know, how do you survive the future is about how do you anticipate the future? How do you build a future without relying on, for me, it's always been, and this comes back to stories, right? And narratives. How do we do this without relying on narratives about the humanness of human beings and the goodness of people and love, not in the James Baldwin way, but love in this kind of, icky, banal way that we've kind of used the term. And I think thinking about it very strategically and thinking about it very forcefully and thinking about it in a sort of, I don't want to use the word weaponistic way, but really thinking about it in a sort of fierce strategic way is something I think is, dare I say, lacking right now, I think, in revolutionary ardor and revolutionary movements. And that seems to be where we are right now, in this kind of trap of feeling. And who can blame us? Who can blame us? Look how shitty the world is right now. I was just telling people before this began that I live in Chicago, and Chicago
They
today
all live in Chicago.
has the world's worst air quality because of the fires in Canada. I'm nowhere near, well, maybe I'm not, I'm not.
Chicago is pretty near Canada, Yasmin. You're like very near Canada.
Able to hop over the border. That's not how close I am. But
you are
here
actually that well. You're not that far away.
I didn't go out at all today, and if I open the windows, I can smell the air rather differently. So who can blame us? Whether it's the environment or whether, I think for us in the US in particular, it is just the brokenness of the systems that we have to inhabit. And I understand the impulse to kind of gather together and to hold each other up. And I think that's necessary. But I also feel like there are other ways of being the future that are required. I'll just leave it there because I'm repeating myself.
Yeah, I think just building on that a little bit, I think one thing I think about is, often when you do, like, say you're listening to an interview with some like really scathing, like leftist critic, they're talking about, they're just tearing apart US militarism or, colonialism around the world, or, some genocidal policies, or, anything. At the end of the interview, very often the person will say, so what gives you hope?
Autumn, don't front. If I came to London and we went on the Karl Marx walking tour, you would absolutely try to sleep with me, and you know it. Don't fucking front, Autumn. We've already had this conversation. I'm not saying I would let you. I'm saying you would try.
Right? And so for me, why the fuck would we be feeling hope? Right? And so I feel like, by saying surviving the future, we're rejecting the notion of false hope, right? Because false hope furthers systems of oppression, no matter what. Like, there's no point in false hope, in my opinion. And other than that, and so I also feel like there's this notion that we need to feel hopeful in order to go on living. And I think that's also not true, and that's rejecting the realities of so many people. And actually, I'm thinking about this conversation in Rehearsals for Living between Robin Maynard and Leanne Beta-Samasoke Simpson. I hope I'm getting the names right. And Leanne at the end says, she's talking about like her history as Indigenous Anishinaabe, and she's saying like, her ancestors didn't continue living because of hope. And she says, this quote I really remember is, she says, Oh, the absence of hope is a beautiful catalyst. And I just love that. So I think I'll stop there.
I love Leanne Simpson so much. And that book is incredible and everyone should read it also. Yeah, that makes me think of actually another Indigenous scholar that I love and appreciate deeply, Kyle White, who is Potawatomi and wrote this amazing article called Science Fiction for the Anthropocene. And it's like the scathing critique of the term Anthropocene. And in it, Kyle White is talking about how it's sort of like this, also a critique of this idea of, you know, that this future is like along some linear timeline, but actually like these things have already happened and they're happening and they will happen. And Kyle White says the hardships that many non-Indigenous people dread and fear most, like particularly they're talking about climate crisis and like the Anthropocene, right, are the ones that Indigenous peoples have endured already due to different forms of colonialism, right? Ecosystem collapse, species loss, economic crash, relocation, cultural disintegration, all this stuff. And so I think that's all of this critique is not just applicable to climate crisis, right? I think apocalyptic conditions are settler colonialism, are settler colonialist. You know, these genocidal conditions that have sought to destroy bodies and minds, specifically through these like particular kinds of practices of incarceration, whether it's from the reservation, the boarding school. Settlers have continued to try to
A boarding
keep
school is the same as a
like
prison?
my grandfather
Oh!
in California in schools.
Oh, isn't that interesting? Isn't that interesting? I don't know if people caught what she just did, or I get she uses they pronouns, whatever. I don't know if people caught what the mullet person just did, because she's trying to trick us with talking about the carceral system, the carceral system, the carceral system. She just equated like boarding school to a prison, and then tried to use it as a way to say that children should be like not the private property of their parents. So children being the private property of their parents in these people's minds is considered the same as the carceral system. Let's listen again. I want everyone to catch this, because this was some tricky shit, man. You've always got to be on your toes when you're listening to socialists, because they say one thing and they use common definitions that we all understand, but they really don't mean that definition. They mean something completely different.
Through these like particular kinds of practices of incarceration, whether it's from the reservation, the boarding school. Settlers have continued to try to, keep children like my grandfather in Riverside, California, in schools.
Settlers have tried to keep children in schools. Why is that part of the carceral system?
Assimilate and to remove any chance of a future, right, for Indigenous peoples. They've sought to destroy and yet have still failed. And so I think about that as sort of this cyclical time or nonlinear time in the title. That's how I read it, is the surviving is this present tense or this gerundive tense of the verb, even though, future always appears to us as if it's something on the horizon. So I just think about that kind of idea that we've already been living in apocalyptic conditions. And we've already been surviving the future.
We are living in the apocalypse, the literal apocalypse right now.
I love
You're right.
all that you all
My
had to
God.
say. I think that's something I was thinking about too, that the future is sort of a threat, right? It's the future of the progress narrative. It's the future of the human and of society and the civilization that's created by settler colonialism and the capitalist state, and is already here, right? And like we need to find ways to survive it. I'm very interested in thinking about like the ways that we are doing that, right? That present, as Matilda brought out in the previously. I see that we've gotten a few questions in the Q&A, so maybe
Good night,
we can
Elena.
go to some of those. Let me look through. Liberty, did you?
I can jump in and pull some. I mean, there's a bunch of great questions here, and I think some of them are bigger jumps from the current topic than others. So I'll try and move us into one that feels like not quite as big of a jump, and then we'll work our way deeper. So Madeline is asking about the transformation of oppressive systems and whether or not there's even a place for that.
Should I try to get on their mailing list and like spy stream their presentations? Huh, that might not be the worst idea I've ever had.
Many of these systems. And the question says, can revolution happen from within institutions as well as from without? And I know y'all have lots of thoughts on that. So that seems like a good one to touch on.
Oh, I have a very short answer. No. Because you always get co-opted. There's no possibility. It will never happen from within. But that's my short answer. I'm sure there's some longer ones.
I was just talking to a friend about, so I do pen pal writing work. I started an autonomous, Black and Pink chapter separate from like the national Black and Pink organization to do pen pal writing to folks who are incarcerated and LGBTQIA+ and or HIV positive. And, I think one of the tensions we feel a lot of the time is, are we working within a system that is like slowly killing people? Yes. And yet like we are trying to extend some kind of sense of like connection and queer kinship to people while they are still trapped in those places. And so I think, while I agree with Matilda that the answer is like a resounding no, I also think there are ways that like, maybe we can make some of these horrific conditions, slightly less horrific. Will they change? No, they need to go away, right? Prisons shouldn't exist. Cages should not exist. But people still exist in them, right now. And so I think there has to be maybe like a space for, reaching out to folks through those
You don't need to keep sending in $2 super chats on their
exist and you matter right now. Even if we are also working towards
I appreciate it, though.
getting
Thank
you out from behind those bars at the same time. Those things have to be happening at the same time. So yeah, I'd say also a no.
And yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think what you're talking about, I think is, reaching the people who are victims of those institutions, not say, for example, becoming the prison warden and, having a kinder, more just, prison. So yeah, so I agree with that strategy as well. But I didn't mean to interrupt. It looks like Yasmin has something to say.
I just wondered, because I always think about the university, right? And as a writer, I'm always frustrated, for instance, by how many resources. And I live near the University of Chicago, which is basically a prison with massive resources. That's
what?
And it has imprisoned.
The University of Chicago is a prison with massive The University of Chicago is one of the most elite universities in the country. It is like, it's considered an Ivy plus school, which means it's not quite like, actually it isn't. It's not quite an Ivy League school, but it's like right like next to the Ivy League schools. I did consulting work with the University of Chicago. The University of Chicago has a metric ton of money and is not remotely a prison. Are you shitting me?
And the area around it in horrific ways through all kinds of strategies. But there are all these resources, so for instance, the University of Chicago is a repository of one of the biggest archives of South Asian language and literature. But I can't access it, neither can many people who would like, actually, not for reasons of wanting to feel their South Asianness, but just because people are historians and people are sociologists, without being affiliated with universities, but no one can really access that, without great difficulty. So for me, it is about, yes, institutions can be murderous, but how do we recirculate and reimagine those resources? How do we make it possible, for instance, for these incredible archives and for these the magazines and the journals that, for instance, we have no access to, the production of knowledge that's going on behind paywalls, where they pay tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes literally a year, and so on. So, I really want us to start thinking about gutting the universities' ability to hoard resources. It's a losing battle here in Hyde Park, I'm afraid.
You know what I will say, I'll throw Yasmin a bone. If Yasmin wants to work on gutting university resources, I think that's a really good first step. Because the universities are like useless. The universities are so corrupted. They're like not even worth like trying to save at this point. And so if Yasmin wants to gut universities of their resources, I'm on board with that. We can form single issue coalitions with the socialists. Like, why not? I'm not a fan of the University of Chicago either. I'm just saying that, like, to say that University of Chicago is a prison is, like, not correct. Oh my God, defund universities. Oh, I love that, Julie. I might make that into a t-shirt.
Right, but I think there are still possibilities. I just want those resources. I want to be able to walk into those archives. I love archives. That's what I want. I want that stuff.
I mean, I absolutely believe in like accessing the undercommons, right? Wherever you are at, whatever kind of institution you are at your paid job, like, as like Moten and Harney say, the only relationship with the university should be a criminal one. And I'm like, any relationship to like these institutions should be a criminal one, like thieving that stuff away, siphoning it away as long as it exists to, like you say, starve them out. Absolutely.
Yeah, we can steal from them. And I mean, the introduction I wrote is called Betraying Institutions. And I think like going back to what Matilda said about co-opting, like when we're involved in these systems, they try to make us identify with them to feel like we'll get our redemption through those systems, and people can go into any of these positions like with like good intentions, but that reproduction of the system comes through each individual who ends up trying to find the solution through that system. So like in the academia, there's like really cool people who will get those resources and make them available, but going through the process of getting tenure breaks you into an academic, right? Where you identify with the system and you think that you belong there and that you deserve everything that you've gotten through there. And I think in terms of the state too, it's just like, since this is an abolitionist book, like the state only operates, right? Like politicians and the police are the same thing, and it operates through that force of law and that violence. And so there's no way to have this kind of like repurpose the state without the police and without prisons. It needs that to work. Yeah, I don't know. Do other people have other ideas before we move to another question? Liberty, did you have one queued up for us?
Yeah, well, okay, so there's actually two hot topic here, y'all. We've got two people who want to talk more about COVID, which is amazing because where I live, nobody wants to talk about COVID.
Because it's
so
July.
These questions are actually very similar.
No one wants to talk about COVID, Liberty, because it's July 2023 when you filmed this, and no one cares anymore. We're all over it. You guys are the only people who are not over COVID.
And I'll just read the first one that we got. It's how do y'all understand the queer divestment from harm reduction in the face of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic? It's deeply confusing to me when I see queers apparently disinterested in community care when it comes to respiratory disease, especially when we collectively have a more steadfast politic around sexual health and wellness. And then the other person who asks about this asks in very similar terms, and asks about what should we still, how do we convince people in our community that we're still living through a pandemic and that we should still be masking
we're
and taking
not
other precautions
still living
to
through a
protect
pandemic
and the most marginalized among us,
oh my
including
God.
incarcerated folks. So also kind of tying back into the question of prisons.
I mean, I think this comes back also again, right, to E's point about what are the stories that are dominant, and the dominant story right now is COVID is over. I was just reading, I mean, New York always infuriates me. Every now and then I renew it just to see, does it still anger me? And it does. Because again, in the most recent issue, it says something like, in COVID in the past. I'm like, no, there is no past to COVID. It's a throbbing present day phenomenon. So I think one issue is that I think in terms of queers, in terms of abolition, in terms of COVID, and this is, because I saw that there were some questions also around gay marriage and about how movements get co-opted, right? So a couple of people were asking about how do we prevent movements from being co-opted or being turned rightwards. And I think that's what is happening in a way. So I want to connect the gay marriage issue, to COVID in that sense, and to think about how do we sustain that radical critical impulse. I think the biggest problem around queer politics, and this is where I think this book is so useful, the biggest problem with queer politics is how it has become not unqueered, but untheoretical and unaware of how power works and where power resides. So queers, I think in particular, and I think in some ways abolitionists, have tended to think about all of these issues in terms of formations, movements around sort of individualistic harm. And I think there's a lot of the term harm has really become popular in recent years, which is important, right? When you talk about harm reduction, you talk about all of that, yes, but it's become very personalized. And I may be getting a little bit too abstract, but one thing that concerns me around COVID is the ways in which I think we've been all persuaded to think that it's an individual problem. If, also even the, unfortunately, even the question of masking, right? It's, we masked to protect ourselves and to protect others. A friend of mine said to me a year ago when things were going to hell in a handbasket, he said, yeah, I knew that shit would never fly because Americans don't care about anyone. That's one issue, right? Which is, I think we need to not think about the harm to ourselves and to others, but we need to think about systemically, what are we fucking up when we don't engage in protective measures? And I think that whole narrative around that story, as it were, that narrative about this is about me and you protecting each other, has actually been the harm. And it's been frustrating for me because I think what I always want to think about is, okay, what are the systems that brought COVID to us, right? And I'm not here to debate Wuhan or not. That's not the issue here. For me, it is, and I think those are sort of legitimate queries, sure, but that's not even the problem for me. The problem is we got here because we've been getting here for many, many decades. So in that sense, COVID has always been around us, right? AIDS was always around us for a long time. And then it showed up because our systems were breaking down. What killed us wasn't the virus. What kills us always is a systemic breakdown and the fact that we have no way to care for our people, which is why places like Vietnam are doing much better. And the United States, of course, cannot deal with that. Like, how is Vietnam? Like, there are fewer people, there's just much less damage in many ways. So, but I think thinking systemically, and I'm always thinking about power. Who has it? How does it make itself manifest?
I know, I'm shocked that Marxists are obsessed with power.
And to, I think in some ways, not stop, but to kind of perhaps de-emphasize the caring part. Again, I'll just stop.
Oh, I'll continue from there. Because it's actually just hearing that first question actually brought tears to my eyes, because it is something that I just feel like I'm living every day, this abandonment, right? And I feel like at the very beginning of the pandemic, there was this moment of possibility when across the board, and I don't know if I've ever seen this, honestly, from the wealthiest, just most privileged people to people who had nothing. It was all this rhetoric, and it's rhetoric, of course, but it was about caring for one another, right? It was brief. It was maybe 2 months, right? But it was a moment. It was like, what, and I feel like, and also just that, say the poster that was very popular at that time, which is COVID is the virus, capitalism is the pandemic, right? So people are thinking structurally, right? But the moment that the structural abandonment started, which is of course the beginning, but they're like it. I feel like the structural abandonment corrupts everything, right? And it leaves everyone vulnerable. And then it becomes like what Yasmin's talking about, this hyper-individualized thing, where not just
You
that
don't
we're
have to have a
taking care
swear
of one
jar,
another,
Beth.
which I don't think is necessarily a hyper-individualized thing, but like this idea, you take care of yourself, nothing else matters. And so, you know, Yasmin brought up, you know, HIV, and I think, you know, it took a long time in that case. It took like basically 15 to 20 years before there were meaningful treatments that actually extended people's lives. 15 to 20 years from acknowledging that there was an epidemic, right? Now with COVID, that happened fast, where people who had access to privilege had access to say like flying to...
I just want to say that I really like Beth's new habit of paying me and then swearing in my like, I don't care if you swear, you can, Beth, swear to your heart's content. You don't need you don't need to give me $2 every time you want to swear. But I appreciate it. Thank you.
You know, Santa Fe, and like, you know, moving into their casita and, you know, hiding out, or like moving to Mexico City even, you know, people, you know, moving all over the world because they can work from home. They don't have to be near anyone, you know, and then of course, furthering that same kind of gentrified mentality. And, you know, but I feel like where, I guess there's that moment though, it haunts me, you know, that moment where the rhetoric of care actually was at the center. And I do think there is a potential to that, but it was squandered. And it was squandered because of the structural abandonment. But I think there's also that question, and this is an unanswered question for me, because structural abandonment does not have to mean that we abandon one another. It does mean that usually happens. It does mean that people don't have the possibilities. But I feel like if we take a very small we, you know, the small we of like in this room that we're here now, like, you know, anarchist, queer, like kind of organizers, and there is more care still in those worlds, which is inspiring. You know, like I think at Firestorm you still require masks. And I think
they
the only
still
events
require
that I
masks
go to
in their
Seattle
bookstore
where masking is mandatory at this point are anarchists. That literally it's just a fact.
Why isn't Liberty wearing a mask then? Liberty appears to be in the bookstore around books. Why isn't Liberty wearing a mask on the Zoom?
And I would not have predicted that, to be honest. But so there is something interesting there. Yeah, it's the only, you know, and
we love masks. We've always loved masks. I don't understand why you'd be confused.
I think they're sexy as fuck.
I mean, I don't love them at all, but I'm going to wear them.
Masks are sexy.
Yeah. But I guess I just to finish there, I guess to come back to the title of the book, right? Surviving the Future. It's like even in that moment, right? That moment of possibility, when everyone was feeling vulnerable. And where there was a possibility for something, or to take another moment of possibility, would be the protest, right? You know, which we're in the midst of the moment when everyone's feeling the most vulnerable. And yet people are in the streets every day because of that necessity. And then that moment, of course, you know, the retrenchment, the police brutality, the like destroying of those movements happened so fast too. So I think I'm just gonna leave it there because I feel like I'm talking too much, but I feel like there's that simultaneous possibility and the structural abandonment, but then I think also the squandering of that possibility at a larger structural level that then makes everything hyper-individualized and keeps everyone vulnerable permanently, you know, permanently. It is a real tragedy.
Right. And this, you know, this reminds me of the most amazing sort of most radical queer organizing tactic around HIV/AIDS, right? One of them, at least, was to say, instead of looking for who is infected and who is not, right? Who has HIV and who doesn't? Instead of doing that, the strategy was to say, assume we are all infected, that we all carry it, and therefore we're all responsible for each other, right? And again, as Walking Dead fan up to season 5, the idea that the virus lives in everyone. I mean, that's the whole thing about The Walking Dead. Big spoiler alert, sorry, but
What the
it is
fuck?
in everyone.
Why would you do
right?
that?
Like, it comes out of anyway.
I didn't know that. I haven't
But this
watched The
idea
Walking
of
Dead.
not looking for who's infected and who's not, the question of testing and all of that is important. But if we assume that everyone has it or is vulnerable to it, rather, right? Vulnerability, to assume everyone's vulnerability
Socialists
is,
ruin
I
everything.
think, the radical thing. And I think that's what the question was also sort of asking about. Like, why did we forget that? Because the system doesn't want us to think that way. The system wants us to understand that, Biden and Jill and Joe Biden will be fine. And if you want to be fine, you have to make your way up that capitalist ladder and get fine. I'll just, sorry.
I would just add like that, I did an interview recently for the Final Straw with a group in Missouri, the Mid-Missouri trans folks who are working while this like emergency rule and these anti-trans bills were coming. And they talked about in this emergency rule, they were singling out how the language in this rule was looking at comorbidities with transness, like through autism, and they have this idea of like social media addiction, depression, all these things, right? And they're talking about how this is like a place where we can have an intersectional kind of struggle of bringing in disability justice, right? That like that transness here is being paired alongside other forms of that where there's like points of lack of access to care, and I think like that is really important to think about. I navigate the world with a chronic illness, and like so like I've been just thinking about this and thinking about like how there's so much social pressure because of everyone not masking, right? And like we can individualize it and like moralize around it, but
the poor socialists. The poor socialists are upset because there's so much pressure. There's so much social pressure with all of these people not masking anymore. Oh my word. It must be so awful for you socialists to feel social pressure because everyone has stopped masking and you are the lone people wearing masks anymore. Dragon Water, thank you for the super chat. If you want to be fine, you have to believe you will be fine. That's exactly right, Dragon Water. Exactly right. All right, guys, we have about 10 more minutes left of this presentation. If you have not mounted that like button yet, now is the time to mount that like button. This is Socialism Saturday, where we watch real socialism every Saturday starting at 6 p.m. And remember, there's still plenty of time to become a supporter on my Substack, carlin.substack.com. And when you are a supporter, you will be able to join us for movie night tomorrow, which is Titanic, starting at 7 p.m. It's an early start time in the supporter Discord. I don't want to hear anyone showing up at 8 and wondering why we're starting at 8, because we are starting at 7 p.m. in the supporter Discord, because Titanic is an effing long movie.
But that social pressure is like really hard to undo. Like when I'm the only one masking in a room, I feel weird, right?
You feel weird.
And I think that's like a real force. I think there's just a lot of things that we haven't like fully acknowledged too, that like the isolation of COVID was damaging, and there weren't ways that we were talking about making space together and that was actually like feasible, and we weren't acknowledging the needs in the same way, except in this kind of cavalier attitude, right, of like, I'm going to do whatever we want, or like, I'm okay, I'm not the one with the chronic illness, like you have to go and like navigate the world with your like special needs, but I'm fine and I'm gonna just risk getting COVID.
Well, we are actually allowed to make our own choices, as it were. Hunter Biden's Coke stash, I feel weird about this. Okay, I do. Reagan, you have a love note. Hunter Biden's Coke stash says, Reagan, I'm 6'1" and make a 6-figure salary. Would I have a chance with you? Well, I know Reagan a little bit, Hunter Biden's Coke stash, and I'm going to bet that like Reagan is more interested in other things that are not exactly your height and your salary. She probably wants to know that you're a good person and like your interests and stuff like that. So maybe you can like, I don't know, slide into her DMs or something. That might be a little bit more appropriate than sending super chat. I mean, I'm not going to turn down the money or anything, but like,
because I'll be okay. So I think like that, basically it's just like a disability justice issue. And like, I think this is why in this moment, again, I'm going to bring it up. Like, you know, we have the AIDS struggle, we have the abortion struggle, right? We have the trans care struggle right now, and COVID. These are all access to care, right? And these are all like disabling possibilities where the state creates the people who have access and then disables other people. That's what the abandonment is. Did you want to? You feel good? Should we have one more question? I'm just like on thinking about time. I know we're probably at the end of.
We've got 10 minutes, so I think we could.
I think
definitely.
Yeah, one more.
For sure. Yeah. I don't know if y'all have been looking. We do have, I think, a couple questions still in the queue. There was one that Yasmin touched on briefly, just about strategies for resisting kind of like co-optation and neutralization of like radical queer movements. And the question was framed around gay marriage, but obviously with everything we've talked about, I think we could equally well think about it for all of these moments of rupture and conflict. Would that be one that people might have additional thoughts on? The kind of resistance to co-optation.
Yeah, and then the other question also, I think just to connect it, brings up the idea that Yasmin mentioned of strategic pessimism too, as like one of these ways to avoid co-optation. Yeah.
And looking for additional strategies.
I mean, I think they were asking, you know, just to reflect very quickly on this notion of strategic pessimism is to assume that, yes, the world is going to end. The world is a horrible place. And I'm putting it in very banal terms, perhaps. But essentially, it's for whom do you want this future? And the future is not for you, right? So understanding that it's odd, right, to think about fighting for a future that may not happen, that maybe might all be obliterated, or a future that you're not going to experience. I think that is a really critical, important thing to keep in mind with organizing, because I find that a lot of organizers actually tend to be in the mind frame of, well, this happened to me. I see this a lot in my field of writing and publishing, where a lot of people will say, well, when I began publishing, I wasn't getting paid. So I don't see why I should have to agitate for anyone else. You know, I've said this 100 million times. If you read my work, I write about this a lot. And my whole attitude is, you know what? I want a better world for the writers coming up and after me than I had when I started. That is joy for me, you know. So I think being pessimistic about human beings, being pessimistic about the future, and still wanting a better future for everyone, that I think is just so critical to keep an eye on.
Yeah, absolutely. As I'm now like also trying to connect like the last question that I didn't answer, but I'm thinking about, right, like what you just said, I'm like, right, like for a lot of us and a lot of our like ancestors and our community now, like imagining a future, imagining a presence in some space and time as yet to come is liberatory, right? Like that is something that has been denied actively. And so I think when I think about the previous question, right, like trying to convince people, you know, who might have a hard time being convinced they need to care about others, it's like, well, whose liberation are you aligning yourself with, right? Whose future existence are you aligning yourself with? And then the other thing that what you just said, Yasmin, made me think of is the future that I actually might not ever see, right? Like you were talking about like working towards other people's better futures, other people's like enriched lives. And that is all of what I do. Like I am in service, like I'm doing so much of this, not thinking I'm ever gonna see the fruits of my labor. I don't know if I believe I will see prison abolition and police abolition in my lifetime.
Oh, you won't.
I have to believe it will happen eventually if I and others work towards it, right? Like we have to believe that people will be freed of cages if we work towards it. And so to me, like, it's not, it could be sort of a pessimistic approach, but I do think like we have to see like maybe a little more of the long game or something, or I don't know, I just have to do right in the world and square myself and you know, at the end of my life with that, because I don't know, if I did nothing, I think I would just yeah, I would feel like I was not aligning with a liberatory future that I want for myself and my kin in the future.
I guess just to connect it to that question about gay marriage and co-optation, I think for me, the question really is, how do we always talk about basic needs for people who are the most vulnerable as a starting point? And the reason that gay marriage was able to co-opt was they pretended that's what they were talking about, right? So if we talk about housing, the right for everyone, right? To have housing and food and healthcare and the right to stay in this country or leave if you want to, you know, a sex life that matters, all of, you know, a support system, like all of these things, right? This is what we all need. So for me, I think it has to always come back to talking about those basic needs. And I think that's simultaneous.
So I want people to listen to what this person just said, because I think this is actually really, really, really important. This person is telling you how these people are selling normies on socialism. Because what they're not doing when they're talking to normies is, I promise you, they don't look like this when they're talking to normies. They look, well, more normal. And what they're saying is, we just want to live in a world where everyone has everything they need and everyone is taken care of and your healthcare is taken care of and you can have a normal sex life and you can be accepted and yada, 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 yada. And that's how they're selling socialism to these people. And it sounds really good, right? But the problem is, the people like on our side that know that all this is bullshit, when we talk to normies about how all this is bullshit, we sound crazy because they're saying relatively normal things. We just want everyone to be taken care of and have a place to live and have their health care taken care of, and we want everyone to be accepted. So we just want everything to be nice. That's all we want. And then people from our side come in and we're like, they're Marxist, you don't understand, they're Marxist, this is the conspiracy theory, and we come across as crazy. We have got to get better at explaining to people what that actually means and what they're giving up in order to give that. And we have to come across in a much more nuanced way than most of the time people come across. I'm going to give you an example. So I saw The Sound of Freedom last night, and it was a great movie. It was a really difficult movie to watch, but it was solid. It was well done. It was filmed beautifully. The story was good. It told a powerful story. It was really difficult to watch. But my point is this: like, after I saw The Sound of Freedom, I came home and I knew people had been saying this is a QAnon conspiracy theory and whatever. So I just started Googling. I was like, okay, now I've seen the movie. I want to see what people are saying about it since I saw the movie. And I came across this one guy who's like a movie reviewer. And I guess that's kind of his thing. He reviews these things. And this guy had posted just a quick kind of like 1 minute like review of The Sound of Freedom after seeing it, and his review was basically like, yeah guys, I know a lot of you guys told me to go see The Sound of Freedom, and I did, and you know, it wasn't quite for me. I think it had some pacing issues and I wasn't on board with the pacing, and I thought it was good, I thought it was okay, but like the pacing issues really bothered me. So the person like that was posting this movie review, because that's what he does, he reviews movies, basically just said like, you know, like it wasn't like a bad movie, but it had some pacing issues, right? Well, I found another guy from that video that was posted like 2 days later. And he was basically like, you know, on that last video that I posted where I said I didn't like the pacing of The Sound of Freedom, I was inundated with people calling me a pedophile and a groomer and accusing me of doing things with children, which seems like a completely rational response to someone saying, I don't like the pacing of a movie. And so, you know what? You're right. Sound of Freedom is the best movie ever, because if I don't say that, apparently I'm a pedophile. And this is the type of overreaction that I'm talking about. And I've experienced this overreaction. I literally like this happens to me all the time. Anytime like I have like a story where I've literally exposed grooming in schools, actual grooming, I will inevitably have conservatives come into my comments and go, "You're a pedophile." And I'm like, "What the fuck are you talking about? I don't even like children." Like, I don't even like children. I understand the problem with what's going on in the schools, but I generally stay as far away from children as I possibly can because I don't like them. How can I possibly be a pedophile if I don't even like children? But my point is this, like, when you go into someone's feed and you're like, "You're a pedophile," when all they've said is something that's like completely normal, you come across as a bit crazy. And don't say there aren't people doing this, because I've had hundreds of people in my feed doing this for saying I don't agree with them. These people are coming across as more normal than our side is right now. And that's sad and that's pathetic, because they're going, "We just want everyone to have a place to live, and we just want health care, and we just want this and that and the other thing, and we just want everyone to be taken care of, and we want everyone to be nice." And the conservative right is responding with, I'm talking mobs of people online going, "You're all pedophiles and groomers, and it's all Marxism, and you want to take over everyone, and 1776 Civil War." So my point is this. There was a time in 2020 where these people looked more crazy than the right. The right now looks far more crazy than the left does to normal people. And so it is incumbent upon normal, hinged into reality people to be the ones out there explaining, not being crazy, not being aggressive. Never call people pedophiles unless you have actual evidence that they're a pedophile. That's just a really shitty thing to do in general, by the way. If you're calling people pedophiles when you have absolutely no evidence that they're pedophiles, that doesn't make you a good person. But we have to be the voice of reason, and we have to be the voice of sanity to say, "Listen, I know what they're saying sounds good. I really, really do. But let's dig into this a little bit further. Did you know they want to take away your parental rights? And how they reach this is they're taking away your parental rights. Let's talk about all the initiatives that they're doing specifically to take away your parental rights in schools." You have to introduce these ideas bit by bit, and you have to do it calmly and rationally. Otherwise, people are going to think you are the crazy one, and they're going to think these people are normal. It's not crazy to not like children. A lot of people don't like I hate to break this to you, Tom J. A lot of people don't like children. I happen to be one of those people. I don't understand children. I don't get along with children. I don't want to be in charge of the care of children at all in any way. I like my money and my freedom way too much. It's not actually uncommon for people to not like children. Hunter Biden's Coke stash. If I can't take Reagan, then it's whatever. Carlin, do you like the USNT? I don't know what that means. Is that like some soccer thing? U.S. Women's Natural. Do you like the U.S. I don't fucking know about soccer. I don't know anything about soccer. You can't ask my permission to date Reagan, Hunter Biden's Coke stash. You have to ask her. Jesus Christ.
How we change, structures of power and take care of one another. But I think it's also how we connect, right? Because people always have this, this ridiculous idea that connecting to.
Hang on, we got another super chat from Hunter. Hunter Biden's Coke stash is the big spender tonight. Thank you. Sound of Freedom was the best movie ever. I don't know if I would say it was the best movie ever. I would say that, in a fair world, I think it probably would be nominated for an Oscar, if I'm honest about it, because it was actually beautifully shot. Like, the cinematography on that movie was it was really good. I'm not sure the script was I kind of agree with the pacing issues. It was a little bit long. I think there were some problems with the storyline. But I thought it was an emotional movie. I thought it was an impactful movie. I thought it was an important movie. I'm glad it's doing so well. But inevitably, people will call me a groomer now because or a pedophile because I was like, oh, well, I don't know if it was the best movie ever. I think in a more fair world, it would have been nominated for an Oscar. At least one for something. I think, again, cinematography, it looked like a beautiful movie. But it obviously won't be, but it should be. And thank you for the super chat. I appreciate it.
To like a larger, to go to publishing, right? It'll be like larger audience, or to like organizing, it would be like middle America, or like all these things. And it's like, so therefore you're supposed to like sabotage. You know, we can't talk about prison abolition, we have to talk about prison reform. But guess what? People everywhere want prison abolition. You know, it's like we have to actually talk about what matters, and that starts with basic needs, but it also means are articulating and fighting for what we actually believe in, not these like
Shawshank is an actual contender. Shawshank was great.
I love that, just because like I mean, I think about this a lot, right? Like
God, we have to watch Shawshank Redemption for movie night. I haven't seen Shawshank Redemption in so long. Bod, have you seen Shawshank Redemption? That's a great movie.
Anarchism, this is the new thing I've been wanting to write about, is like there's something seductive in anarchism, and if we hide what we're really about, we can't seduce people into like becoming, you know, criminals with us. And I mean, anarchists and queers are very good at gatekeeping in the way that Yasmin was talking about, like, which is like, oh, well, I went through this, so you need to go through this, and you know, having the suspicion about anyone else having it easier, and that's something we can counteract in our own daily lives. I think that's important. But like, you know, just kind of bringing this back together in a more general way, like I think one of the ways that we keep getting caught is that like we assume these goods as
Green
something
Mile
worth
is
fighting
also
for,
a great
like,
movie. It's a wonderful
which is like
movie.
humanity, the world, civilization, whatever, society, and those are these like places that I think the power systems kind of creep in, and this like humanistic language that we like fit our struggles into to try to gain more people onto our side, and that just ends up diluting it more and more. So I think like we need to be real about like, yes, we want to end this world. Maybe this world is ending right now in a way that's going to harm more people. We want to end it in a way that's going to free more people rather than continue to harm them. Maybe should we end there? Any final thoughts from anyone?
Oh, I think that's a brilliant place to end. I want to say thanks for editing this book. I hope there's a little link so people can support Firestorm in staying in business by buying the book from the Radical Anarchist Collective, and not from some other scary place you might go. So I hope there's a link for everyone to jump on that right now. But yeah, I want to thank everyone. It's been such a fun, meaningful, intimate, and wide-ranging and sometimes surprising conversation. So I love it.
Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, agreed. It has been a great conversation. And I will say, as wide-ranging as it's been, the book covers so much more territory. The range of voices is really incredible. And I hope that people will take the time to pick this one up and really spend a few days with it. I mean, I think there's a lot to find and be excited by here. So thanks for teasing some of the juicy bits, and I do hope people will grab a copy from wherever, but from us if you want to.
Get it from Firestorm. Thank you for hosting us, and thanks. I love being in conversation with all of you, and thank you for all the questions too. Really appreciate it. And yeah, if you read the book and you want to reach out, I love to hear from people. So find me.
All right, y'all. Have a great night. Thanks again.
All right, guys. Well, that is the end of Socialism Saturday for tonight. Another eventful night. I really appreciate you joining us. Remember to mount that like button on the way out the door. And of course, please make sure you stop by my Substack, which is Carlyn, KARLYN.substack.com. Please make sure you are subscribed for free minimally. But if you do want to support the work I'm doing and sign up for $8 a month or $80 a year to keep me in business, you can go ahead and do so, and as a reward, you will get to join us for movie night tomorrow and every Sunday. Normally, movie nights are Sundays at 8 p.m. in my supporter Discord, But tomorrow we have a special start time of 7 p.m. because we're watching Titanic and it's 3.5 hours long. So we're going to start a little bit earlier. But normally we do movie nights every single week on Sundays at 8 p.m. That is one of many perks that you get when you sign up as a member of my supporter Discord for $8 a month, $80 a year. In addition to funding my work, you also get access to 2 Zoom calls with me every single week. You get access to Bitchcraft, which we're doing next Saturday. Will be our next Bitchcraft, which is a Zoom call on Saturdays where we bitch and we craft. All crafts are welcome, even crochet. And we do those on the second Saturday of every month at 3 p.m. Eastern time. So you get access to that and so much more. And I really do appreciate it. Guys, I usually take Sundays off for streaming. That's not to say there won't be a surprise stream. I don't know. Maybe there will be. Maybe there won't be. But I will definitely see you guys for movie night tomorrow in the supporter Discord. Take care. Have a great rest of your night. And we'll see you soon. Bye.